Recording in progress.
Dobar dan. Poštovani dame i gospodo, sada otvorim ovu našu šestu po redu konferenciju Udruženja za pravo energetike Srbije. Tema današnjeg razgovora i diskusije, koja nam svakako da bude, su reforme u energetskom sektoru. Dear ladies and gentlemen, hello. I'm honored that I am opening the 6th annual conference of Serbian Energy Law Association titled Reforms in Energy Sector. Yesterday we had here one round table on the titled Connection to the Grid. It was full of people who seated here and discussed about such important topics. I would like to tell you again, welcome to our 6th annual conference. And it is approaching basic school age. We have learned to write and read. As I said yesterday, we had here our colleagues who discussed connection to the grid, and the roundtable was organized together with our partners for CIRED and SIGRED. Today, we would like to make a deep dive into the future of the energy industry. We have here our actual partners from COP28 conference. President of European Federation of Energy Law, Vicente Lopez Ibermeyer, were there. He just arrived in Madrid and he will tell us something about it. Also, Christian Egenhofer, who is sitting here with us, he traveled from there yesterday to be here with us. The energy industry went a long way to come to its original question about sustainability. And more than 100 years ago, Nikola Tesla made remark that if we use our fuel to get our power, we are living on our capital and exhausting it rapidly. This method is barbarous and wantonly wasteful and will have to be stopped in the interest of coming generations. The heat of the sun's rays represents an immense amount of energy vastly in excess of water power. The sun's energy controlled to create lakes and rivers for motive purposes and transformation of arid deserts into fertile land. 120 years ago, we are now talking about coal phase out and trying to explain that it requires expenditure of capital. We are very much about legal and economic solution to facilitate such expenditures of capital. It is about alignment of interest. In other words, it is about the law. I'm told that the problem is not about technology. Technology for that purpose is available. It is not free, though. It is about commercial contracts and commercial secrets. And that is about the law. And Nikola Tesla has put it very precisely. The day science begins to study non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in one decade than in all the previous century of its existence. This is also about the law. And this is why we are here this morning. This is why COP28 discussed the youth and children this morning. Vicente, you are there. Please tell us how was at the conference, and also please say your remarks to our conference. The floor is yours. Vicente Lopez Ibormar will take the floor from Madrid. I think that he's connected, yes.
Yes, yes, certainly I am. Good morning to all of you. Good morning, dear friend Branislava Lepotic. It's a great pleasure to be with you this morning again, even from Madrid. You know very well, Branislava, that I would like to be there. That would be my entire wish, and to join you again. But unfortunately, it was too much. The last 10 days, and I couldn't, in fact, do it. I had to be in Madrid yesterday till very late in the evening for an arbitrage procedure. That was the main reason why I couldn't attend this morning the present with all of you. But I am very pleased to join this sixth conference, even from Madrid. Congratulations for your words. It has been very inspiring, and I also very, very much welcome and like the statements you made coming from this genius that was Nikola Tesla. I think he was really a highlight of not only the electricity, but the energy sector as a whole, a visionary with an incredible capacity to figure out how things would happen in future, and I would refer to that in a few moments. But I would like to say that something that you all know very well, that we live in a very complex times that call for an effort in the clarity of ideas, a political unity, courage, and determination. Also in the field of energy law. A firm commitment with values of peace, of course, as the first one, the strength of the rule of law, and economic development and growth, and the benefit of our citizens and our countries and our people. The same values that at the end of the day have animated and inspired the process and ambitions to create and to develop the European Union. After the events that we lived a couple of years ago, and even last year with the crisis and the war in Ukraine, we live these few weeks ago, months ago, the more weeks than months, a new conflict in Middle East, something that is distressful for all of us, and also something that is, at the end of the day, related with the energy sector and with the energy law. But we have to once again call for peace and for unity and cooperation in the international relations sphere. But let me refer a little bit about COP, taking into account that I was invited by Branislava to talk about COP conclusions. And I would say that if you remember well, in Egypt, we made some as always, advance and efforts in the field to create some financial mechanisms of in the sphere of the climate action. But what I see in the COP 28 that is still ongoing and it would conclude next week, and I very much wish that they will have a very strong declaration in some issues. Is first that it was a good organization, generally speaking. Always is very difficult. There is dozens of thousands of people there, and it's very complicated to manage all these. There were two structural zones: the green zone for civil society, stakeholders, and so on, and the blue zone, what is traditional for governmental delegations and officials. But I think there were, I would say, three things that call particularly my attention. The first, that these engagements to make an additional financial effort with the loss and damage found agreement. I think is to some extent a kind of perhaps the amount should be elevated as soon as possible, but it is a kind of breakthrough for developing countries that they desperately need this type of support. And to some extent, I wouldn't say that is unprecedented, but shows the necessity to attend this type of needs and to establish and to close the gap between developed and developing countries on the efforts to climate action. So I think it was a good effort. I do very much welcome and call for the incorporation of many countries on these new loss and damage fund that has been agreed and established on the COP 28. I would say the leaders of this movement was the hosted country, the Emirates, and also the European Union, particularly in this case, Germany, but also some others, and United States, China, and India, and on the benefit particularly of the South Hemisphere, and I would say Africa continent that need desperately this type of helps, and they merit this, of course. And another thing that I believe it has been important in my view is this compromise that I understood from generally from the international community that is bringing together in Dubai for triple renewable energy capacity and doubling the efforts in the energy efficiency under the legal principle of efficiency first in the months and years to come, particularly till 2030, as is the traditional objective that we have on this route. This will undoubtedly, I do hope, accelerate the phase, not only the phase down, but the phase out of fossil fuels. It was a controversy, as everybody knows, but I think it should be clear, established that the objective looking at 2050 should be phased out, even though I am also aware of all of you how difficult this would be according to the challenges that the international community has on that front. So I would say increase and multiply by 3 the renewable capacity, make a great effort at energy efficiency. So at the end of the day, of course, is to reduce emissions in the line that it has been also announced and established by the COP27 and the objectives established by the negotiator teams on that moment. We will see probably on Tuesday that kinds of agreements to reinforce and to create another line of loss and damage fund agreement. Also, there were another announcements. Emirates announced that they would put on the table 30 billion for that purpose also from now to 2030. So there are, I believe, quite positive things, but at the end of the day, we have to increase the commitment and the effort, because the final targets and objectives are nearby. We have only 7 years for 2030. It goes very rapidly, and we have only one generation from now on to 2050, and we have to be very much aware of all this. And now let me talk a little bit about energy law, because during this year we've done, I think, a bunch of things on the field of energy law. I very much recognize the effort that is being done on the field within EFELA, but the Serbian Association under the leadership of Branislava. Thank you so much, you again. But we have, I think, a beautiful Congress and very comprehensive of EFELA last July. And we have also made a sort of leadership in the chapter of energy law in the international International Law Association. That I think it was also extremely interesting, where we have evaluated particularly all the chapter connected with the disputes on the international, with the connection international law and energy law. And we have been also exploring possibilities to reinforce the governance of energy law. That I think is something extremely important, and the regulations concerning particularly the European Union, the European Union ecosystem. The mission of energy law is to regulate the economic activities and services. And to this end, to provide security of supply as the overriding guiding criterion for the sector, but also to prepare regulatory frameworks based on principles that ensure and promote the defense of climate requirements in the application of legal energy policies. It is therefore incumbent on energy law to organize this urgent transition on the basis of new cross-cutting principles, which are valid and applicable to all energy sources, and by means of a new organization and codification for its regulatory framework and the systematization and updating of its very wide spectrum of legal relations. A legal system that will simpler and clearer to operate, analyze, interpret, and investigate research if it is designed, studied, and laid out as a whole from the unity of the system and not from the depending of the singularity of each of its parts, as has been the case up to now, and incorporating the objectives of decarbonization into each of them and into the legal energy system as a whole. With this, what I wanted to emphasize is basically 3 things that I mentioned in many cases. First, the energy law is a global law. The energy law covers all the supply chain and covers all the supply chains of all the technologies and sources of energy, from oil to renewables, and also energy efficiency. And it has to be able to express on that way, and also reinforce the principles and even extend it. I now very much defended the principle of green first, because it's very much connected with the taxonomy criteria. And among all these things, also, we have to make, I believe, an effort to codification of this energy law. In conclusion, I would very much like you, with regard to the European Union events that I would like to mention even for a minute, I believe we need 3 efforts. One, to update the level of transposition with regard to the clean energy package. There are very important elements that still it has not been transposed. I am referring particularly to the demand, the self-consumption, the collective self-consumption, the good regulation with regard to the energy communities, and some of the activities on that field. That is very important. You mentioned Nikola Tesla, and I could add even Thomas Edison, taking into account the conflict that existed between them, that it was the same one in so many in so many formulations, because Edison and Tesla, they had provide us the elements not only of the electricity supply, but the vector of energy services. But they didn't have internet, they didn't have digitalization, and now we have digitalization. So local markets can be done. And this would be very good and very interesting, and they would provide a lot of value added services to the final consumer. So we have to complete this part of the clean energy package transposition that is very much referred to the energy services. The second thing is to complete also the Fit for 55. And on that sense, I would very much like to remember the necessity to complete the draft elements of the directive of natural gas, green hydrogen, that is a vector as electricity of the energy sector, and also the renewable gases. So we have in the final end, in the final mile of this draft directive, that it should be adopted and transposed at the highest speed, because if not, some expectations that has been created with regard to certain energy sources wouldn't be in fitting at the proper speed and at the proper level. And finally, I would mention the two pieces of law. One is the promotion of energy renewables that has been, as you know, adopted. Very important, particularly in the field of permitting and how to establish and to coordinate and supervise the adoption of these permitting rules, and with the creation of the acceleration zone for renewables and so on. And the second is the revised directive for internal market, that I believe is something very important. And we have in a rounds of negotiations in next Wednesday, if I am right, there will be another meeting in the trialogue between Commission, Council, and Parliament, and I do hope that things will be finally adopted. That's very important to have a clear understanding of the PPAs methodology and contracts, and the contracts for differences, among other things that I'm sure you are, as an expert, very well known and aware of the content of this draft. So with all this, I would like to very much wish your sixth conference a great success. I would be very much grateful if through your national association, and particularly through Branislava, could keep me informed on the conclusions of the Congress, and to communicate it to EFELA, and to put clearly on the front of our website. And I would wish very much you very fruitful discussions. Thank you very much once again for your very kind invitation. Thank you, Branislava.
Thank you, Vicente. Thank you for your nice speech and for your contribution to our conference, and also for your efforts to upgrade energy law. We were together 1 month ago in European Commission, and we met DG Legal, Mr. Daniel Calea Crespo. Thanks you, Vicente, for that. At that day also was assembly of EFELA, and all friends from European Association were there. And this is really a mission, how to upgrade and explain and deal with energy law, which is all as a moving target. Every day we realize something new. Thank you, Vicente, again. And I would like now to invite Mr. Ljubo Macic, advisor to Ministry of Mining and Energy to say a few words to us. As you know very well, Ljubo was involved, if I can say, energy law also, from his contribution from very practical side, from energy agency, EPS, different position, and this wide experience. From this position, please, Ljubo, take the floor is yours. Say something. Yes.
Thank you. Ja ću govoriti srpski. Prvo, meni je nekako dopalo da se vama obratim i dragim organizatorima hvala i srećan sam zbog toga, moram da kažem. Uvek sa ovakvih vaših događaja odemo kući na svoja radna mesta sa nekim novim idejama i sa nekim drugačijim pogledima, pa i to bude korisno svakako i tim pre nama koji nismo pravnici, koji drugog ugla na sve ove vaše probleme. Dame i gospodo, tokom 2023. godine u Srbiji je nastavljeno usklađivanje pravnog okvira u energetskom sektoru sa tekovinama Evropske unije. Usvojene su izmene zakona o energetici i taj proces se nastavlja još obimnijim i u dobroj meri već pripremljenim izmenama koji će se dogoditi u 2024. godini. Tako će taj proces za ovu fazu reformi biti kompletiran. Ovim je obezbeđena osnova za dalje promene u energetskom sektoru. Pripremljen je Nacionalno energetsko-klimatski plan Republike Srbije zajedno sa strategijom razvoja energetike do 2030. godine sa projekcijama do 2050. To će biti okvir nove energetske politike Srbije. Usvojit će ih nova vlada i nov saziv parlamenta nakon izbora. Težište reformi se sa promjena u regulisanju mrežnih energija premješta na energetsku tranziciju. Ratifikovanjem Pariskog sporazuma Srbija je krenula na taj dugi, moram reći, skup put, a dinamiku i sadržaj promjena nastojimo da odredimo uz podršku Evropske unije, sledeći ista pravila i procese koje i ona primenjuje. Jedan od ključnih mehanizama koji će te promjene posticati je cena emisije ugljenika o kojoj će danas se najviše govoriti. Srbija nema dilemu da li će, čim bude bilo moguće, primeniti cenu emisije ugljenika, te da će neminovno primeniti ETS pre ulaska u Evropsku uniju. Međutim, moramo biti uvereni da će mehanizam koji ćemo u međuvremenu uvesti biti funkcionalan i održiv, da će odnos između benefita i negativnih posljedica biti u korist kupaca energije, jer se pored dostupnosti energije mora obezbediti sigurnost snabdevanja u realno očekivanom nacionalnom, regionalnom i evropskom okruženju. Tri su dimenzije bitne, rekao bih. Prvo, mi smo veoma svesni problema i evidentnih negativnih posljedica eventualnog nespajanja našeg tržišta električne energije sa tržištem Evropske unije. Drugo, znamo da se troškovi primjene CBAM za elektroenergetski sektor Srbije, da oni neće biti visoki jer će se energijom trgovati samo u cilju sezonske i dnevne optimizacije bilansa bez sistematskog izvoza, a inače taj izvoz će i svakako sam primjenom CBAM-a postati neisplativ. Međutim, moramo voditi računa i o drugim sektorima i drugim robama na koje će to imati proporcionalno bitno veći uticaj. Treće, znamo da bi troškovi primjene očekivanih cena u ETS-u, kojim treba da se dostigne Fit to 55, izuzetno visoki, da su izuzetno visoki i pored smanjivanja emisije koje će uslediti i u koje krećemo u Srbiji. Konačno, vlada mora biti uverena da će zbir ove tri veličine na relevantnom nekom vremenskom horizontu biti pozitivan za kupce energije, pre nego što donese odluku o primjeni cene emisije ugljenika. Očekujemo da će impact assessment urađen u skladu sa dobrom EU praksom sve to transparentno sagledati i za svaku ugovornu stranu energetske zajednice pojedinačno, ali i integrisano za energetsku zajednicu u celini. Takođe, da će impact assessment sadržati analizu predloga fleksibilnosti Evropske unije, kojom će se obezbediti adekvatan dodatni prelazni period za ugovorne strane energetske zajednice, kako su imale članice Evropske unije u primjeni istog mehanizma. Kao i da će obezbediti analizu predloga fleksibilnosti u nalaženju rešenja za integraciju tržišta našeg regiona sa tržištem Evropske unije i pojedinačnih zemalja. Na kraju očekujemo da će Evropska unija podržati dekarbonizaciju u energetskoj zajednici finansijski i na drugi način, na principima solidarnosti primenjenim unutar Evropske unije, a proporcionalno klimatskim ambicijama strane. I takođe u skladu sa Parijskim sporazumom koji treba da se sprovodi tako da odražava princip zajedničke, ali diferencirane odgovornosti i odgovarajućih mogućnosti uvažavajući pojedinačne nacionalne okolnosti. Nadam se da će bilans saglasnosti i nesaglasnosti o načinu primjene cene emisije ugljenika posle ovog skupa biti manji nego sa onim što smo došli na ovaj skup. Želim vam uspešan rad i proglašavam, ako ja to treba da kažem, 6. godišnju konferenciju Udruženja za pravo energetike Srbije otvorena. Hvala.
Ja se zahvaljujem gospodinu Mačiću na lepim rečima i kako da kažem, na jako dobrom i izazovnom uvodu, da sad moramo da damo doprinos rasvetljavanju ove zanimljive teme. I kao uvek, kao i obično, mi smo dugo radili, mnogo sam naučila od njega, evo, dobili smo zadatak. Thank you, Mr. Mačić, for your nice introduction for this very important and interesting topic. And as I learned from many years cooperation with Mr. Mačić, we have a task and how to contribute for better understanding of this very interesting topic. Thank you, Vicente. Thank you, Mr. Mačić. And now we are starting the first session. Our moderator, Anđelka Todorović, you know her from the previous conference. Anđelka, the floor is yours. Please take it.
Thank you very much, Branislava. You can hear me. So it's my pleasure to welcome you to our first panel of today's conference, which is CBAM, its meaning and effect. Today by a distinguished panel of professors of law, economists, and we are going to delve deep into a topic that is deeply affecting our region. My name is Anđelka Todorović. I'm a partner at Wolf Tice and I work in project development. But today I'm addressing you more or less as a member of UPES and its sister association WISE, which is Women in Sustainable Energy. I join you today as I like to do the same as most of you, which is I like to study complex systems, I like to take them apart, and I like to see how they work. And today we are going to delve a bit deeper into one such system that is affecting us greatly, which is CBAM. So we have appreciation today that we are addressing an expert audience. So we understand that many of you have already done your homework, and our intent today would be to delve a bit deeper into today's topics. That said, we want the conference to be beneficial for everyone. So let me just set up the building blocks a little bit before giving it off to our speakers. So if you know the EU ETS, I like to look at it through the lens of the polluter pays principle. So what the EU has done really is capped the level of GHG emissions for large industrials in a way that you have a maximum that you can emit. The system in plain terms has a carrot and a stick. emit less, you can save for next year or you can trade. But if you emit more, in that case, you have a hefty fine. So you either have to rethink the way you do your business or you have to purchase. So what do you purchase? We're talking about currency, and currency are emission allowances. So an emission allowance is 1 ton of CO2 equivalent. And from what I've learned this morning, in November, it was around 100 euros per an allowance. The second term of art we are going to be using today is the carbon leakage, because if these are limits that are applicable to our production, say I'm a very large industrial or an airline operating in the EU, well, what's stopping me from moving all of my production outside of the EU, and my emissions in the EU are effectively zero. So in a way to counterbalance this carbon leakage, what the EU has implemented is CBAM. The CBAM, in very, very plain terms, aims to equal the price of carbon for EU domestic products and imported products. This obviously impacts the Western Balkan region in many ways. We are currently in a transitional period where manufacturers from our region need to monitor both the volumes of their import as well as what is the carbon footprint of their products. Now, to delve much deeper into this topic, I have a great pleasure to welcome him this year in person in Belgrade, the Deputy Director and Legal Counsel at the Secretariat, who will unpack this toolbox of CBAM for us. The floor is yours.
Hello. Thank you, Angelika. Thank you also, Branislav. Good morning, friends. I thought, under the impression of yesterday's reception, and as you made Nikola Tesla once again at conference, you cannot go straight into the nitty-gritty details of contract provisions and regulations, etc. But you have to start a little bit higher, also because Nikola Tesla was not only a one-man industrial revolutionizer in himself, but also a visionary in terms of the impact of the revolution that he triggered on society, on democracy, on our countries. And that's precisely the situation that we are in here today. Again, we may not have yet encountered another Nikola Tesla in this situation, but we are definitely in a situation where what's at stake is as high as it has been more than 100 years ago. And only cynical politicians would probably refuse to endorse that transition and to engage in this transformation and simply dodge it. And that's also a notion that has resonated very intensively in the energy community over the last years. As you know, we have been set up on the very narrow scope of energy industries, energy sector, but that scope definitely has and must be broadening to an extent that what we are talking, what we are promoting also in the energy, making and helping to make our contracting parties fit to come out as winners and not as losers of this new industrial revolution. And that's why I would like to talk a little bit about the transition in the energy community and indeed unpack what we have in our toolbox to help the countries. And CBAM, ETS is likely to become part of that in one way or another. But if we only look at the snapshot, and that snapshot is taken from our upcoming implementation report, the situation looks green, evidently, right? So the transition is advancing very rapidly also in the member countries of the energy community. That is maybe a little bit misleading because the focus of our current work is quite narrow and focuses on issues such as renewables, energy efficiency, climate policy to some small extent as well. And indeed, in these areas, our countries, including Serbia, and in particular Serbia, are doing quite a formidable job. But you can discuss on that basis, of course, of whether we are already engaged, whether we are already as deep in the transition as countries around us, and in particular as the European Union is. And when we talk about European Union, the first reflex always is, well, of course they advance faster because they have more money. And the European Union is a distribution machine for funds as well. But what they also do is they have a toolbox called the European Green Deal, which is in a carrot and stick manner, if you want to take Agielka's metaphor for that, pushing or pulling their member states to not hesitate to engage in the transition, but to speed that transition up. And what's the situation in the energy community? What's the situation here in the Western Balkans, for instance, in Serbia compared to that? Well, and that's the question, what is driving our particular energy transition? We definitely see that we have been going through decades of non-investment, that witnessing also from a logical, natural, technological point of view, the end of coal and lignite as natural resources in Serbia and beyond as well, the writing. So that is a driver of transition, evidently. Just the fact that non-investment calls for rapid catching up, and that the fuels on which we have been relying are reaching their end. The EU accession process, reinvigorated after the war against Ukraine, has become another driver, again, something to be discussed, but has become another driver as well. And so are the many international donors that support countries like Serbia, actually refer, as the EU does in its negotiations, to decarbonization goals, covenants, objectives, conditionalities. We have seen massive investment in renewables, or beginning of significant investments in renewables, also in the energy community. Now, that is not necessarily coupled with a stringent coal phase-out policy, but that is maybe something that also other countries on the globe choose as their major transition pathway, invest in renewables and let the old fuels stay for the moment as they are. It's a way to decarbonize. Whether it is the most suitable way, whether it is the EU way, is another question. But that's part of what we see in the energy community. I think something that we normally don't discuss, but which has a great impact, is the EU taxonomy. So the fact that funds will be difficult to raise, if not impossible, for fossil fuels, and that very strict and standardized criteria apply to what kind of access to money you can still have in the energy sector. What we don't necessarily see as drivers, there was a massive price surge over the last couple of years, and yet this is very much cushioned here in the energy community by retail price regulation. So we don't yet see the true and undistorted price signal or as a driver of transition, and definitely we don't see carbon price, not only the key feature of the EU's transition toolbox here, but also the topic of today's discussion as that driver. The risk of non-action, I think, are obvious for all of us. We are looking here at an aging fleet of energy generation. We don't want to watch them collapse. Then the modernization will lead to a lot of lock-in costs, which is also not a smart way forward. We, of course, see the price of non-action as well. The modernization gap that I've been mentioning will be widening. It will be difficult, more and more difficult, to make sure that countries like Serbia get out revolution on top and not somewhere among the range of developing countries. And and the end date for waiting, I think, is also clear. It is EU accession at the very latest. If we wait until then, what we may just see are price shocks and even massive deindustrialization of our countries. Now, before going into the carbon pricing, I thought we should quickly discuss what was the hot topic, the fashionable topic over the last couple of years, also in the energy community, and to some extent it still is. That is proper decarbonization or transition planning. In European terms, the National Energy and Climate Plans, NECP, which for maybe the first time in Europe have changed not only the efforts to make a massive project such as the transition decarbonization subject to a good project management and a good project planning, but also how European integration works. This is not about rules to be implemented and if not to be enforced. This is an iterative process, much closer to the subsidiarity principle, where the member states engage in a discussion. In the EU, there is probably also expectations that have not been fulfilled when it comes to the NECP. That is partly due to the fact that plans in the EU have been mushrooming. You not only have the NECP, you have the Next Generation EU and its recovery facilities and plans. You have the Just Transition plans. So you have plans all over, and it's difficult to keep track and ensure consistency. And also, let's face it, these NECPs have not reached also in public visibility the status that they could have as the central transition planning instruments. In the energy community, we also have mixed feelings and mixed experience with plans. Think of, in another area, of pollutants from coal power plants, for instance, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, etc. Think of the national emissions reduction plans, launch a couple of infringement procedures because the countries wouldn't take their own plans seriously. And we see the process also in countries in the region. Very often, this is a task, the planning outsourced to consultants. They put together very nice documents, but what may be missing is the seriousness, the ownership of those who are actually to implement those plans. So I think we can already conclude the plan neither to 2030 nor to 2050 or beyond. We need to have more tools. I will not dwell here on the main features of the plans. I'm still under the impression of having also reviewed the Serbian NECP, the draft NECP, which was the first one in the energy community. You could, from that cornerstone of the plans, the policies and measures, of course, it is a plan that relies on many policies and measures indeed, but you cannot help yourself also seeing that some are of what would need to be done in any way. We see a certain lack of ambition, in particular when it comes to achieving the renewables targets for reasons that may all be discussed. And definitely, and that's not Serbia alone, the topic again of our discussion here, carbon pricing, is mentioned only marginally and with not a real ambition that would develop the carbon pricing into that driver of the transition. And here comes the CBAM. So the EU not waiting for countries across the globe, but also in their neighborhood, to make up their minds and decide on pricing carbon by themselves, but to do it by way of an EU regulation. Now here comes the laws. In non-legal terms, I really think it was a wake-up call that the EU will assume in an assertive way also its geopolitical role, and that definitely goes for the Western Balkans as well. Interesting that this happened now here on greenhouse gas, or linked to the European ETS, and that nothing similar has ever been proposed for the lack of complying with such as sulfur dioxide. We still witness a situation where the non-respect by the local power plants here of these polluting standards goes unsanctioned, and that is to the detriment of human health and lives. But finally, and at last, we got the clear signal that CO2 emissions will be subject, as you said, to the same polluter pays principles as it should apply to other pollutants as well. The principle, I think you explained it already, so I'm not going to spend much time on that, is quite simple. We have to buy the allowances under the ETS for exports also of electricity, and that shall be the focus of our discussion, at least here and for me. They are determined by default values normally, so that's the generation mix of a given country, and only in very narrowly defined circumstances you can rely on the actual values, such as the export of renewable through power purchase agreements. The main question, of course, and that's also what triggered our action, the main philosophical practice, why would you pay in Serbia to Brussels? Why would you transfer money to the EU that you need desperately here to stimulate the transition? And I think that's something that also made the European decision makers think when it comes to the Western Balkans in particular, or the energy community. So in the regulation, there is a clause, a particular clause that has been designed for the energy community, which on the one hand recognizes the closeness of relations, and on the other hand also is meant to protect the ongoing project of coupling and integrating electricity markets, something we will discuss later in more detail. So that is a compromise, a possible loophole for electricity exports that's not available to other goods covered by CBAM. And the criteria are very clearly set in this exemption in the regulation. So what essentially we would need to not, our companies to not have to pay to Brussels under the ETS scheme as applied through CBAM would be an ETS system which reaching price equivalence by 2030. That's the main criterion other than market coupling. So if these two things are in place, we will be able to dodge CBAM. Whether, as Lyubom suggested, we want to dodge CBAM is another question, and we'll come to that as well. But if we want to do it, the criteria are quite clear, and it is also clear that the window of opportunities is a very small one. We don't have much time. We would need to agree on the design of such an ETS system for the energy community countries over next year and maybe the year afterwards. If such a design is agreed through a decision in the energy community, then an exemption will provisionally apply. We can start constructing the system over the years of 26 to 29. We can start also piloting it, however it will look, probably only after 28, because what we do have to rely on is something that's also not very often discussed. That's the MRV system, monitoring, reporting, and verification. very technical, very unspectacular for lawyers, but it's the basis for everything. You need to know what are the greenhouse gas emissions actually per installation before you make them pay for that. A lot of work to be done there, a lot of challenges to reach that. And if we manage, then from 2030, that system would apply, and CBAM would indeed be replaced by an energy community system, however it is designed, of its own emission trading scheme. The big question is evidently, what do we mean by price equivalence? Does that mean the 80+ euros that are currently being paid in the EU and will increase? Or does that mean equivalent takes into account other factors, such as the socio-economic starting point? Well, those are all issues as they are not clarified yet for discussion, and potentially also for, if not negotiation, then for passing certain messages on to those in Brussels who will define that ultimately and in a few years from now. A lot of the discussion also focuses on alternatives to an ETS, such as carbon taxes, domestic carbon taxes. Well, again, the CBAM regulation is very clear for electricity. That can be applied. Of course, nothing prevents a country from applying a carbon tax, but not as a replacement for an emission trading scheme, a cap and trade scheme, and also probably only a standalone for a few years between now and 2030. Even if you think, well, we could maybe broker a compromise and implement carbon taxes in each country, which would somehow float together with the ETS price to reach that criterion of price equivalence, that is almost impossible to do. And the question is why to make it so complex and complicated if the template system is already out there. And that template system is, and Angelika, you have described it, of course, the European ETS. What we have to take into account and keep in mind when we talk about the European emissions trading scheme is that it has been made so robust and also so comprehensive over time that in the EU, the days of coal or fossil fuel in general under the ETS are indeed numbered. It's carbon endgame in the EU. There is no expectation that anything less will be expected from those countries which are either to join the EU by exceeding or join the EU's electricity markets by market coupling instruments. So the EU is very much determined, has developed the ETS into the one big driver of its own transition. Now, against that background, I think it is a unique opportunity, this Article 2.7 of the CBAM regulation, the exemption for electricity, that it doesn't actually include a predetermination of how the system, the ETS system or ETS-like system is supposed to look, but it leaves it to the creativity of the energy community countries to come up with their adapted version. And that's also in the energy community, not to be taken for granted. As you know, the way how we function is we get on our tables very slightly adapted directives and regulations from the EU. Then they are being put forward for voting to the contracting parties of the energy community. It's a simple majority, so before you know it, you'd be subject to the ETS directive. So it is actually a remarkable step that in this case, the EU works the other way around and says, well, you tell us what you want, and then we'll try to adapt it more than just cosmetically, but really fundamentally. And that requires creativity, that requires looking into those building blocks or those elements of the ETS where you can potentially fiddle with. And I listed a few of them. Of course, it's the scope in the first place. So the discussion, and this discussion has started also in our fora for now almost a year. One of the topics of that discussion relates to the fact who's supposed to be covered by the ETS, by an ETS in the energy community. Only electricity or all CBAM sectors, for instance, still open for discussion. How will the governance of such an ETS look like? A lot of discussion has been led on, and I believe that's more labeling than it is a real discussion, whether that should be a regional, whether it should be a common, a European ETS. Well, what remains is that as institutions or bodies or governance elements such as registry, auction platforms for the primary market for allowances, and they are there already. You can only ask yourself the question whether you want to link to them immediately or whether you want to take and pay the additional costs and duplicate that at home or in a regional framework. There's certainly pros and cons for all that, but this is also part of the discussion related to the governance. Then, of course, very importantly, how is the cap being set? The cap is the key feature of the ETS in the EU. It works through a and gets more and more serious and ambitious through a linear reduction factor. How do we design a linear reduction factor? Do we backward engineer from 2050 carbon neutrality, or do we use the greenhouse gas emission targets for 2030 and build on that? Given that the system only will start in 2030, you can ask yourself the question. I think somebody's at the door. No, I'll be brief. And or do we not engage in that level of ambition and just base ourselves on grandfathering? That is, whatever you have emitted will be the starting point of future emissions as well. Difficult to negotiate, but it is an option. And then something where I indeed can be brief, because I know it will be covered by Christian afterwards in much details. The key questions of free allowances. If you get free allowances, something that actually the EU is phasing out, if you get free allowances and complement that by a pathway to phase out these free allowances again, but you start with a certain number of allowances for free, well, you probably can get around a lot of the discussions on the impact. So if you get something for free, an asset, that means that the impact is normally positive. As we say in German, you don't look into the mouth of a horse that's being given to you as a gift, right? I can't translate that into English. The other question, the remaining question, is also how do we use the revenues? That's, of course, in the first place up to the countries. Now also the European Union rules have become more rigid and predetermine what you need to use the money for. Revenue usage is very important, not on transition, but to support also those who will experience an impact on the prices. There's a lot of creativity that you can use there as well in designing a smart revenue usage, maybe even a modernization fund for the energy community that could be topped up then by EU money and other donors. And let me conclude on this issue on whether the design should be one applying only per country, or we should indeed engage in a common vision and in a common roadmap towards getting to an ETS-like system. I think there's a couple of good arguments for that. First of all, we have the Energy Community Treaty, so why not use it? It can adopt decisions, and that's the beauty of that. We have been discussing that in the past, that also bind the EU. So you don't only export rules, but you integrate the EU in the scope of those who are obliged to accept, for instance, contracting parties' allowances in their system. The risk for decoupling our electricity market, which we are just about to couple in a process which is complex by itself, is extremely high. If only one country in the region here is exempted from CBAM, then it has to impose a CBAM border towards its neighboring countries. So what we will witness is precisely what runs against the idea of regionalizing and integrating markets, namely erecting electricity barriers, and that's what we want to avoid at all costs. And we would also want to avoid a race to a bottom, a rat race, essentially. If you start implementing carbon prices, be it tax or ETS, in every individual country here in the region, and assuming that there will be more coal-based electricity flowing in the region after CBAM kicks in, you can be pretty sure that this race to the bottom will go almost close to zero in order to give your own economy, your own industry, your own electricity generation industry a cutting edge. So we will have to avoid also this distortion of competition in the energy community. I think this is self-explanatory, and it is a conclusion. And before you have to hit the the bell constantly, I just leave you with that. No, I don't need the 2 more minutes. But just to wrap up, I think we witness a transition here, the beginning of a transition in the energy community that is largely driven from outside factors, including the CBAM. But the awareness, how important it is to be proactive, to be creative, and not just to sit and wait until others decide on our fate, is growing. That's the Tesla spirit. The CBAM is indeed a clear determination of the EU that they don't want to sit and wait anymore. And it is also very much similar to the market coupling process, a situation, a call that exposes us to European processes. It's not like what that was our traditional job, to observe what countries are doing, to monitor, to help them, to assist, but to give them their own time. With CBAM, you a roadmap in a timeline that is not being determined domestically or regionally here anymore. So as no matter how you see the CBAM, but it is also increasing the importance of the EU setting the pace and the time. We have a window of opportunity. Flexibility and graduality are the elements on which we can focus in designing a good system to avoid a situation where with EU accession, ultimately you have no other chance than just to take and leave what's on the table, take or leave, and you can't leave, so you have to take what's on the table. We are in an integrated market already. We have the ambition really to make the energy community countries as EU member states in the energy sector way before accession, essentially over the next 1 or 2 years. And we can't allow this to be unraveled again by bad decisions on carbon pricing. There is a lot of discussion still to be had. Our upcoming Ministerial Council will be the next milestone in that respect. Most likely there will be an agreement on an impact assessment on a couple of these factors that I mentioned. That is, of course, something very legitimate. My only concern is that this is a signal to sit and wait until some consultant has developed an assessment. We will lose precious time. And as you have seen previously, time here is really of the essence. We don't have decades. We only have a few years, and every month counts. And that's why also our meeting here, I hope, is an important milestone. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and I'm very sorry for interrupting you. Your words are always very valuable to us. We're just trying to keep time. Nonetheless, you have not escaped my one question, and the audience will have a chance to ask their questions after the panel. But we have spoken about, the ETS being somewhat, the carrot and the stick. But if I was a industrial manufacturer sitting where I'm sitting right now, from what I see, I have a lot of administrative and later financial burdens. It seems like I'm only getting the stick. So why is this? Can you comment on this and how we can sort of overcome this period for our producers?
I'm not sure whether I would call that the stick, and you explained it by yourself. The rationale behind the CBAM is to make those who participate in the European market to put them on the same footing as the EU market participants. So if it is a stick, it is the same stick that has been applied to all other market participants. I would rather, and of course, a certain risk that everybody just remains in their comfort zone. It doesn't only go for our companies in the country, own calculation and say, okay, this is a stick, I perceive it as a stick. I take that stick, it won't hit me too hard. And the same is on the EU side. There's a, why would I care about the transition in these countries? I get money to my budget. So let's just make them pay much, not much. That all depends on the calculation. But the carrot, the chance, is rather the opportunities this exemption offers for company managers. And this really requires responsible company managers to not just get hit by that stick, soft or hard, but to use the opportunity to design a pathway where they achieve what they anyway need to achieve. Get out of paying fossil fuel and get into the future of energy.
Thank you very much. I will use this as a leeway to the presentation of our distinguished guest, Professor Christian Eggenhofer of the School of Transnational Governance at the European University Institute of Florence, Italy, and his presentation, What Could Be Western Balkans' Way to Reach the EU ETS? The floor is yours.
Micro, yeah. Thank you for the introduction and invitation. Dirk, you mentioned the transition period to 2030 on the CBAM. My worry is, whether the plants that exist in this region will last that long. So I think time is of essence, as you said, and we need to have something rather fast. Now, if I have here my mobile phone, it's not because I message while speaking, it's just for the time that I would like to stick to my 15 minutes. You see, I'm currently with the School of Transnational Governance, and there we work on carbon pricing, sustainable finance, energy, and industry. And some of you may know me from my time at CEPS, where I'm still in, where I worked on ETS, EU ETS for a long time, and please forgive me, I may have a bias, Dirk knows that, on ETS, and actually I have even impeccable CBAM credentials, because in 2010, I'm a bit older than most of you here, we did a book on pricing carbon at the border. At that time, we were laughed at. Now it's there. I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's there. That's the point. Now, two warnings. I'm not a lawyer, so I may think a lot of don't make sense to you. Second is the good things take time. Remember, we were at the Nikola Tesla Museum, and it took 70 years from his death until finally a car was named after him. Now, I guess the carbon pricing will probably come much earlier. No, I'm actually quite sure. I would also, on the COP, Vincente mentioned it, trade and climate was a big issue. Was my main job there. I was in many meetings. All of these discussions were not very sophisticated. We are on record. Oh, they were very principled and very political, and you saw the outcome today. So I think we really need to look, and that's the thing for the lawyers to do. So I want to focus today on, how do we get from this situation of non-investment? I mean, Dirk, you mentioned that, to an investment into low carbon, because the low carbon is the only, is the future. We mentioned it, and no need to repeat it. It's not easy, or probably not easy as an understatement. It will be immensely difficult, and there will be no easy and no fast solution, or no easy solution. The easy solutions are gone because we are much too late. The situation is rather dramatic, and I guess we need rather drastic solutions. Will that work? I don't know, but our job is to think through. Again, let me go back to the COP. At the COP, the debate about the coal phase out or the fossil fuel phase out has changed. Before, we also talked we'd have to have a lot of renewables and then the fossil fuels disappear. No, of course not. You need to make space for the new energy, and for that you need to phase out the old energy. You like it or not, and that has really been the heart of the debate at this COP. We brought together the fossil plus the other, and there's a relationship. If the old energy stays, you need excessive subsidies for the new one, and that is not just in the long run. So the key is, like it or not, the coal phase out. Without this, it's not going to work. At least not going to work in my view, my honest, my modest view. It's not going to work unless you spend excessive amount. Will the coal phase out work? I don't know. I had a lot of great ideas already in my life, but they never came to anything. But let me just say this: 10 years ago, I was in I was in Southeast Europe promoting renewables, Bulgaria, Romania. We were laughed at, and at COP this year, last Tuesday, 3 deputy ministers from Greece, Romania, Bulgaria were announcing 111 investment plan for the region by 2030. That's about 2.5 times what they need as peak. So things can happen, and hopefully we will also, some of that will happen here. Now how does it, oops. How did you? Yeah, no, I press, but okay. Oh. Man, it's good. It's not me. So maybe somebody from the laptop can do it. No, let me also use this. Just I need to catch a plane, and since we are late, I may need to slip out at some stage. Please apologize. I had planned to stay in the discussion, so I don't know how far we get. Okay. Dirk, you used all the firepower. You know, you exhausted the batteries. Yeah. Okay. It works now. Thank you. Fantastic. Yeah, the context. I don't need to mention the context. Dirk has gone over this. So let's go through the plan. You know, we're developing on integrating the Western Balkan in the EU ETS. Is the Western Balkan needs investment, money, and not stimulus. The EU works essentially on investment stimulus. You create market, you create targets, etc., and then the market, the private money comes. So we looked at the various possibility that how this investment could come. One in the past, so we blending EU and other multilateral money, which is quite political, and it hasn't really worked because of many reasons, you know better than me. We are facing a meltdown of the power sector. Maybe that's a bit dramatic. Now, the regional ETS, and Dirk said we are talking here about, regional, non-regional. You know, we don't know. Now, my question really on a regional ETS is, will it lead to phase out? Carbon pricing is always very political. You set a cap, and you end up probably with a low carbon. It's probably the worst of all worlds, because you have a low carbon price, you have no incentive whatsoever, and you increase the power prices because the cost, you have a lot of carbon in the electricity sector, so you get a power price increase without any incentives for coal phase out or new investment. And that is also where, for example, the South Africa has getting it wrong. They put €8 or $8, and then just to get a power price increase, and the government needs to subsidize again. So basically, you gain nothing. Now, we develop a concept on the ETS. It's difficult, whether it will work, we will see. But I think there is a huge opportunity also for the energy community to play a major role there. Or there would be corrosive money, which from major global players, that is possibly even quite a likely situation. Now, how has worked for the Central and Eastern European countries? There is this Article 10 modernization fund, which is still used. The Article 10, Bulgaria, Hungary, and Romania, they are provided free allocation, which they use the money from the free allocation they use for the investment. And I will explain that Czechia, Croatia, Lithuania, Romania, and Slovakia have said, we don't want Article 10 any longer. We put that money into the modernization fund. And the modernization fund has one huge advantage. Dirk mentioned also flows from EU to non-EU. The modernization fund has 2% of the total allowances in the EU, which is auctioned there. So we talk about 46 billion from 21 to 30. It's a lot of money which is there, can be used for modern or coal phase out. Estonia, Latvia, Poland said, we can do it ourselves. We auction off the auctions, the allowances, put it in the public money. We know best how we use it. We don't want to have it earmarked. So two possibilities, Article 10 or the modernization fund. The modernization fund has a solidarity element. Now, how does it work? Hungary is the Article 10 money into a fund. Romania said, we give it ex ante. You have a project, you get the money. Poland, when they used it, said, we give it ex post. We trust our power sector, but, a bit of control is perhaps better. So once you, in the time you propose, you get the money, so you use it as a collateral. And get it on time, the government takes the allowances, auctions them, puts them in the money, and puts them to good use. The Commission assesses and accepts or rejects, and the modernization fund is managed, if you wish, by the European Investment Bank. And So there are slightly different governance arrangements. How could it work in the Western Balkan? To be part of the acquis. You could do this by a ministerial meeting, but as I'm not a lawyer, I may be completely off the mark. You know best how you would do this, and Dirk certainly finds a solution for that. It would include temporary free allocation. Temporary is important, but only for coal phase out. I cannot see politically that there will be money for modernization. Like the old modernization fund, the old Article 10 had money for modernization. You put in, biomass co-firing and this kind of stuff. You use it for grid, you use it for many, many other things. So it would need to be dedicated for coal phase out to be politically feasible. That's the tough part. The Western Balkan countries would receive the free allocations for their share of the emissions, which they can put aside for a phase out. But you will need no, I'm still okay. Thank you. So you could take this aside for collateral for phase out, as for example Poland has done. But it's clear other sources from the EU, from EBRD, wherever they come from, will be needed. The projects, the new investment would be supported, and then to bring it over the finishing line, you use the collateral from the ETS. Now, the countries would need to identify their plans for the coal phase out and to be substituted by renewable solutions. That is installation by installation. Installation I don't want and I replace. Now, to the options, Article 10, different models exist. I've explained that. Or the modernization fund, you bring the free allocation in a Western Balkan coal phase out fund. Then you have the earmark for the different countries that's managed by the European Commission. EIB could be managed by the energy community, whatever the governance arrangement we choose. Now, in terms of money, if you take 60 million tons of CO2 from the power sector, it's a little bit less. And 80 euros per ton, we talk about for an 8 years period when you go from 100% to zero, I mean, conceptually, you talk about 20 billion. Don't hold your breath. 10 billion will already be gone. Half of that will be gone because you need it in the beginning when your emissions are still high. You need to give it to the inefficient power plants to cover their emissions. But as they go down, you save off the allowances. So 10 billions, I guess, would be available for collateral. That's my last one. So we are perfectly aligned. So assuming we start in 2026, when Dirk and his colleagues have implemented the MRV provisions, for each ton of CO2 emitted, there will be EU allowances required. Initially, for 8 years, they be given for free. And as the new investments come in, some of them will be saved. By 2034, that's our idea. I mean, we could discuss the timing. The free allocation stops, and you can avoided the emissions. Money from the free allocations can be used as a collateral to be dispersed once the projects have been done. As I said, this is tough stuff. Our job is to create ideas, think them through. The lawyer's job is to put them into law, and the politician's job is to make them into reality. And again, the caveat, please allow me to add the caveat. We had many ideas which never saw the light of the day, but there were a lot of ideas as well, which in the end came through, and the ETS was one of them. Let me stop here before I get another bell. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Egenhofer. The same, I will leave the Q&A for the end, but let me ask one question. On paper, it seems quite simple. Identify the polluters, substitute them with the renewable energy source. It seems quite simple, but in reality, how can this be practically implemented? What's like the first step after that for the countries in the Western Balkans?
The first step is that you need to think it through, discuss it, as a possible option. If politically you say it won't work, forget it, don't waste your time on it, do something else. There needs to be political will, maybe in some countries. And then you will probably need a number of people saying, this is something I want to promote. And if you see those, I'm sure, you can never be certain, but I'm sure that some people in the Commission or in member states will say, let's give it a try. Let's turn it around, the question. I haven't seen anything which has, I'm not entirely sure it works, but I haven't seen any other plan which convinces me more.
Thank you. I would now like to welcome to the floor our economist and expert in energy policy, Mr. Alexander Kovacevic, who I'm sure will have a lot to say on the topics of the need for investment into decarbonization of the energy system in the Western Balkans. Mr. Kovacevic.
First and foremost, operators have to eliminate emissions, as Christian said. All international treaties are about elimination, not about paying tax. Only if these people are given chance to invest, fair chance to invest, and they fail to do so, then polluter pays principle applies. So I think that have to be understood. This is how basic accountancy rules tell us. And enabling investments is actually a public good. It's our duty, it's professional duty to enhance the public goods. So here we are talking about how, why, to create a chance for investments. I put 7 questions to address. These are the 7 questions. You will not calling things the name as it needs to be called. It's not just a breach of environmental rules. It's a violation of human rights. And we have to understand, we had a lecture here a year ago. We are not looking to further enhance liquidity of the treasury. That's not in public interest. Paris Agreement came in 2015 and made some of the material obligations of Energy Community Treaty obsolete already at that time. Problem now escalates. It practically precludes EU accession. Precludes, absolutely. And if we still don't understand the basic physics, here is a little bit of that. We cannot, by any means, increase CO2 emissions. So these investments are practically off the table. We need to do something else. There is another problem which precludes EU accession. It's a terrible poverty. And we are not going to get out from poverty without additional energy. So not the energy we have today, twice more per capita. And in the same time, we have to reduce carbon intensity of GDP. So bigger GDP with lesser carbon intensity. And that's a very, very complex task that needs to be done in parallel. Here is what Treasuries has been doing for the last 18 years, divesting from security of supply in many different ways, through taxation, through, let's say, implicit taxation, through rules and regulations, through liquidity, etc., etc. So we are now at the end of ability of the physical assets, the end of resources, and the end of quality of resources. That's why I say we are not looking to improve liquidity of treasuries. They are not acting in the public interest. And we do expect that treasuries in this kind of country are actually not acting in the public interest. This is why this kind of country needs external assistance. It's unbelievable that we are repeating discussion which was done in the World Bank, in international organizations 25 years ago. Absolutely unbelievable. Here is the need to be done here. Here is another, the risk of floods. If we haven't been able to understand already in 2002, 2003, 2005, 8, etc., the floods in 2014 are probably sufficient lesson on the risk of flooding. So all reasons for floods are still there, and floods can happen every now and then. So we haven't removed any of the reasons. Sovereign recourse funding. This is what we have here. So most of our investments are against a sovereign bond. So-called renewable investment, essentially investment into sovereign bonds, what many of you are working on. EU assistance, investments of international financial institutions, etc. All this is against a sovereign bond recourse. However, our energy sector from 1947 till end of 1980s has been built on non-recourse funding. This is our history, this is tried and tested, and it works. So we need something different than the government bond. That's something different. One, removes sovereign political risk. Remove uncertainties. Eliminate complexity, specifics, obsolete, and untested solutions. That's what we are talking here about before. All kinds of different untested solutions. And don't waste time. We already lost 12 months from the first ideas about accession to EU ETS. It's not obvious, but it is potentially win-win situation. EU member countries may have a good use of this process. They also have human rights to protect of their own citizens. They also have industry which needs to export and sell high quality, high technology, modern technology goods. They also have a problem with competition from third countries, etc., etc., etc. And eventually, they may be concerned about their own energy security. It's not at all sure. The year 2022 tells us that European Union has not been actually concerned enough about its own security of supply. We have paid terrible price for that. And finally, as it was understood even by our political leaders a year ago, yes, liquid market, large market, free allocations, and use of these free allocations. It's now 23 years. In this room, November, December, year 2000, I was speaking in front of more than 100 people from tens of the leading energy companies in Europe and United States. They came here immediately after political change to participate in what they believed is an outstanding investment undertaking. The Serbian energy company was able, in the previous year, 1999, to re energy system after the war in 5 months. These people reconstructed from trash, they installed, designed, and installed somewhere else 24,000 tons of high voltage equipment in 5 months. This company is able to do the job. They have not been given a fair chance. This is where we stand. I hear in last 3 months, 6 months, fantastic stories that companies in the Balkans are not able to do this and not able to do that and not able to do a simple evidence what every basic plant operator is normally doing for decades. It's unbelievable. So that have to stop. Companies are able, they may ask for assistance, they may get assistance if necessary, but they have to do the job. This is their duty, this is their responsibility on security of supply. However, they need non-recourse funding because they're exposed to the political risk as any other investor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kovacevic, for your very clear and very succinct presentation. My one question for you, once you've had a seat. So my one question for you before I give the floor over to the other speaker is, in your expertise, what is the time horizon? Do you have a time horizon in mind when Serbia or other Western Balkans countries will join the EU ETS?
Well, I very much agree with Christian. There is a need for preparations, not only administrative, but also technical. People have to develop innovative, new, different commercial projects. And yeah, in 2026, as anybody else, we can actually get in and get these free allocations and make use of this.
Thank you very much. With that, I would like to invite to the floor our last speaker for today, Ms. Gordana Lazarevic, who joins us as an economist and former Minister for Planning and Programming of EU funds.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for your patience. I'm your last obstacle before the coffee to come. Today we are speaking about CBIB new tax. What the tax means from the point of the market. It's a hurdle to enter into the market, and it will be a great hurdle for Serbia, because we are not trading only with the energy, we are not producing only energy, we are also having partnership relations with the European single market since 2002. What we are talking today, we are talking how to avoid that hurdle, make space for development in the future on our market. Why market is so important? Because if you do not, you don't earn. If you do not earn, you will not have money to pay clean energy, which you will need in meantime. So it's a very sensitive thing, and we don't have seen all the data and discussions which have been done over these years about the needs of the region. For Serbia, from the day one on the path of the EU integration, single market and enter to the market was the priority. It's the priority even for the energy. If we have access to the single market, we have access to the funds and the other securities and money which are there and which will pay our development. We are missing in these discussions about CBM, Ministry of Trade, Ministry of Finance, custom officers who will declare the carbon emission, Ministry of Economy, because they will be definitely influenced, because Serbia main partner, trade partner is EU. So let's come back to other things which we haven't seen here. We really do not know the potentials of the renewable energies in the Balkans, and we are not abundant at that part. From experience, it might be seen, but I'm not able to illustrate with concrete figures. So if you have a deficit in the clean energy, you have to buy it. You have to be a partner with the big market. And let's come back to the beginning of the EU, how EU started. EU started with the clean, with the coal and steel community. This means hurdles, remove the hurdles for the production and open the market. Market without hurdles is an asset for everybody. For Serbia, we started in 2000. That means immediately we got asymmetric on the single market. That means it was possible to have a favorable position in the market to earn money for your own development. Progress in the market relations with the EU, a reduction of the import obstacles, liberalization of our trade with the EU. We started to give exceptions to the trade with the EU, and really it boosts the trade of Serbia with the EU. If you look into the data, we were liberalizing our trade within the 6 years only. That means that we came to the balance with the rights and obstacles with the EU market in a very short period of time. We made our trade 5 times bigger with the EU than, and if we now introduce the hurdle which is in carbon and the carbon tax which will be collected by with the EU budget, we are really putting our trade with the EU on stake. That stake is very huge. Our trade relations were at the size of 40 billion euros per year. That means that we will pay dearly for these things. We are not able in no time to find such big partner, because if you look at the other partners, they are minor partners in comparison to the EU. So that's one thing which we really have to think how it will influence our income from the foreign trade and whether we will be able to get some compensation for that. If you look into the data, approximately 10% of Serbian export is eligible for CBAM tax. Approximately 70% of our production of GDP, of goods and services is eligible for. So that means it's a very, very expensive for us not to know how we shall develop energy and where we should find the fund and how funds collected from the taxes on Serbian commodities and paid to the EU budget will be used. Because if you tax something, you have to invest those taxes to remove the obstacles and the problems which you have. And here we do not have a clear picture yet how it will be done. Integration into the EU markets was very important for Serbia. And from the early 2002 and 2003, Serbia really put a lot of the efforts to have established transport community and energy community. How strong our efforts were are illustrated by the fact that the transport Southeast European Transport Observatory had seat in Belgrade, and we were the promoter of the establishing transport community very strongly. We recognize the potentials of the transport and the progress in the transport and the use of energy in transport and the decreased pollution is visible today. The other community which we strongly were proponent to make it, it's energy community, and we joined it very early. You can't imagine fights within the government and politicians we had that we accepted rules of the EU to be implemented in our energy system at that time. We also opened the most challenging cluster, which is called Green Agenda in 2001. We have adopted negotiating positions, transport policy chapter, last status assessment in progress report is good level of approximation. Energy chapter 15 is medium level of approximation. So that means those are very high levels in comparison with the other chapters which are open. So it means a lot of efforts has been done. We have a very dynamic changes in the sector of energy. Reforms of energy sector are not monitored only by the EU, they are followed by the IMF. And in the last standby arrangement of the $2.4 billion, IMF is giving more than a half to the reform or reorganization of the energy enterprises. That means oil and gas and the electric power company. So we are decoupling them and reorganizing those bodies, and they are not anymore state-owned companies. So that control of the companies and transparency of their work is increased, and the data are public. So that means everybody can use and control Serbia And this is giving that monitoring system exists, and it is the issue how you will use the documents. Also, what is very important is that the statistical office is certified by the Eurostat for the of the goods and commodities, able to follow in line with the Eurostat regulations, and statistical office, which is also providing data to the other agencies in the European, has the best compliance with the rules. It is at the level of 4, which is the highest level in assessment for the European progress reports. So law on energy is amended, law on efficient use of energy is in state, law on renewable energy resources is also there, new energy development strategy is in place. So we have done a lot. We had this year, we have increase of prices of the energy in the energy sector 3 times. Everybody noticed that, but also we had the first renewable auction. So that means we are doing a lot, and that we should be eligible to be really part of the European energy market as well as it has been done. But the issue which is there, and we really do not know the size of the need approximately, but we don't know how it will be done, is how we shall finance energy requirements. Everybody is looking for the grants, and obviously country of this level of development will need grants for development and closing the gaps in the transition. But that opportunity is not very huge because things are really changing within the EU. We are looking at the EU and other donors as main the resources, but economic position of the EU is changing over the time. In 1923, in 2013, EU GDP was 95% of the USA, and last year it was 65%. We are omitting Brexit and the power, but we also have to look into the future. Reconstruction of the Ukraine will have the costs, where EU is promising a membership. New members are coming, new cost of the enlargement coming, and we do not have any calculations because we are not member country, how EU budget will be able to finance all those requirements. So very many are relying on that or counting on that, but we don't know how it will go. But we, at this moment and within the period of IPA instrument up to 2027, have the promise that 9 billion euros will be paid from EU budget additionally to the regular IPA, and it will have a huge grant element in place, and that grant element is 9 million euros, and we hope that it will attract additional 10 to 15 billion euros for investment, but we don't know whether it will be there. A new growth plan for Western Balkan is also announced, and the very encouraging for us is first sentence saying economic convergence is significant benefit of EU membership. The positive impact on the country GDP and income levels that arise from the integration with the EU single market combined with the EU cohesion policy has been clearly demonstrated in the past. This part of the sentence cohesion policy. This is the promise of the new approach of the EU towards integration into the EU, but it is not materialized yet. For this, we have to negotiate. But going further to the document, you have a very confusing statement that first Western Balkan countries to act on the harmonization of their regional markets. It's in a conflict with the single market. We are in the single market already. We don't need to go into the regional markets, maybe in some sectors like energy, but generally we do not have. Generally, regional market is regulated by CEFTA, and there, but some of the members of the CEFTA are not sticking to the articles of the agreement and putting unilateral hurdles on the markets. That's totally different things. That is the things which has to be discussed within the CEFTA, not within that. But what we would like to see, we would like to see data on the investment needs of this region for the rising demand for electricity, and especially clean electricity. We do not have those data. We don't have any position how it will be done. We don't also have data on the potentials of the renewable energy, and we don't see. What we have just recently heard is Mr. Macron saying France will continue with the nuclear energy. That means that the stability of the energy supply is not viable without stability in the production. Renewable energies are very volatile and depends on the very different factors, so it can't be there. And just to finish, money, huge amount of money. In 2010, we were looking at the ecology and at the level of 20 billion investments. Now with the price and the inflation is going up. And what is of very great concern, everybody will have more money for investment in the energy, and interest rates at this moment are on rise, and the predictions are that the interest rates on the financial markets will stay very high in the next 5 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Ms. Lazarevic, and she was our final speaker for today. I would now like to open the opportunity for our guests to ask our panelists any questions they may have in relation to their presentation. No questions. Oh, we have a question. Yes, please go ahead. I'm not sure if there's a microphone.
Oh, second try. My name is Sima Jabulovic. I'm a member of the UPIS and Young Leaders in Energy Sustainability Europe, and I have a question for the entire panel. I'm sorry, I wrote down the question because it's interesting and it's for the entire panel. So, in the light of recent events and continuous opposition in Poland and other like-minded stakeholders against CBAM and ETS, can we construe or draw a false presumption that both CBAM and ETS have room for further improvement? If so, how would you personally improve upon it? And are there any arguments that both systems in certain areas may not be in line with principles of EU custom union and even applicable World Trade Organization law? Thank you.
Thank you, Sima. I had not expected a simpler question from you indeed. maybe give this one to Mr. Egenhofer or Mr. Buchler.
I'm surely can say something because I'm not a lawyer. There's a lot of debate. My assumption is, and that's the record I know for the last 35 years, that when something like this is drafted, it's very carefully drafted to be legal. That's the logic. So I would be surprised if it's incompatible. I know that the CBAM was, when it was drafted, went back and forth on a daily basis, the drafts with Capitol Hill. So there was certainly a lot of legal input there. I know that a lot of people having a different opinion on that. But there may still be issues on the implementation which may make it incompatible. And one could be the way the EU calculates the emissions. That could be subject to legal challenge. And that's my understanding, but I cannot say anything sort of more than that. And I'm sure the lawyers will have opinions. Aren't you a lawyer?
Yeah, I think I am. But you asked two questions about challenging in front of WTO. It's happening, but at the same time, one probably shouldn't overestimate the WTO system these days. There may be an outcome. Anyway, this dispute resolution system is not functioning because the appellate body is not effective, so there may be a panel decision. They are normally not very straightforward and then without many consequences. What is equally interesting is probably if such an exemption that we have been discussing previously would be in line with the WTO law, or whether that would violate the most favored nation principles. So I think, and as regards to your question about the improvement, CBAM, first of all, electricity was not intended to be in there until very late in the process. And then the exemption was not intended to be in there either. So that was already a huge compromise for one sector. And I think our discussion is now how we can make best use of that compromise. It's true that there is still a lot of interpreting documents to be expected from the Commission. Whether that will materially change the system, we'll see. But that something that has been agreed with also such political investment as CBAM will be changed fundamentally, I wouldn't expect. This is now something that has taken the EU a lot of headache and internal discussions to agree on. So maybe fine-tuning, and we should really appreciate that in our sector, and for our countries, we have maybe a grayer zone than in the other areas, and make sure we make it as light as possible there.
Yes, Mr. Kovacevic would like to also.
I guess it's all right, actually, that yes, it's carefully drafted. Yes, it took a lot of time, but it was also challenged today, this morning, at COP28 by various countries. I guess that we are talking about uncertainty, essentially. We don't know what is going to be an outcome of the political process. And we don't know what will be the outcome of various retaliation measures various countries will do against this. So this is going to be a trade war. There is no clear winner of the trade war. We don't know. Uncertainty is there. We simply don't know. So this is the real thing. For somebody who is eventually planning investments, it is very, very difficult environment.
Thank you. We have one more question from the second row here.
The same time, we heard that EU is the main trading partner, so of course there will be impact from CBAM on other sectors. But let's say, and at the same time, the exemption is only for electricity. So all this running to catch up and design an ETS system is really, with the timeline, only relevant for electricity sector, because for the other sectors, maybe the countries, including Serbia, might decide to go for another carbon tax and another system. But will I understand correctly, because you were speaking about the Western Balkans countries and you were speaking about designing the fund, replicating the modernization fund from the EU. So do you understand correctly that your proposal is that the only manner, let's say, that these countries could go ahead is if they would design a regional system at least? Because what we heard, I mean, Dirk was saying from the energy community, all the options are still on the table. They need to say what they want, national, regional, decide to wait for joining EU to get an EU ETS or whatever. But what you were presenting was to go for a regional solution. Is that the only one would make sense or not? And how, if not, how it will work if it's a national? I mean, every country designs a fund. Will it work? Does it make sense?
No, no, I was talking about the full integration of the Western Balkan countries, electricity sector. You could include other sectors as well into the ETS. They become members of, they fall under the rules of the ETS, trading EU allowances like does Norway, like Switzerland, Iceland. A national ETS makes absolutely no sense, because one electricity company trades with itself. That's insider trading by definition. A regional doesn't make sense because there won't be any liquidity. It's also all state-owned, so that's there will be much liquidity. But the main concern about the regional is that the countries in itself will probably settle for a very low price initially and do capacity building, MRV and all the rest of it. And that has no impact whatsoever, except that the electricity price will go up. And that's the worst of all the worlds. No, full integration, that's the model we are discussing and we have defined, but there would be a special Western Balkan modernization fund, which is a coal phase-out fund. So it would need to be adapted, because the old modernization fund is about modernization of the sector, including grids and all the rest of it. It is about phase out of coal in a certain period using the free allocation that is left as a collateral to push the projects, if they then exist, over the finishing line to get the final investment decision going. So that's, sounds simple. The reality is probably a bit more complicated.
Please go ahead, Branislava.
Dobro. Sad me čujete. Možda ovo pitanje, okay, I have one question. Maybe this question is not just for our lecturers. I think this is the question for all of us here regarding this so important topic. Here, we are listening about different ideas. That's very important, to have many ideas to find the perfect solution for this very complex case. But what is also the question which will come next? We are here, countries accession countries to European Union. And there is a system for that. ETS is there. It is working. It has its structure. It is explained. Christine explained to us, Dirk mentioned that is something which is real. Okay, we are somewhere aside plans to go there. And if we establish very strong systems in our countries, national, regional, anyhow, and how to merge these two systems when we, one country by country, who knows in future how this accession process will work. I think this is very important. Maybe our lecturers don't need to answer this, because this is if I rhetorical question for all of us. If you like, of course, I appreciate this. But think about that. How to structure the system, because the question is still open, how to structure the system which will be easily be a part of this our predicted way where to go. And that will help to all of us to find the solution. Thank you.
Yes, I can take. Now you posed a very broad question, but it also has legal components. So maybe I can try to give a few reflections on it. I see essentially three ways how non-EU systems, ETS systems, can become part of the EU. One is through accession, but then it's very clear, this is take it or leave it. You have the EU system where you cannot change a iota. The other one is through linking. That's what Switzerland did, but it took years, I think 7 years, and they already had their own carbon system previously. So before 10 years, nothing will happen there. If you build a national emissions trading scheme, and the third way is this, which may have a window of opportunity under the CBAM, and as Christian described, would be an immediate accession of the Western Balkan countries, either in one wave, or also that could be phased in, depending on how far they are. But it would go under a decision by the energy community, which would also oblige the EU to open up its markets towards the allowances from the countries here, and eventually create additional features and goodies like Western Balkan Modernization Fund.
Thank you for this explanation, and to make to us clear way how to think and how to establish the system. Sorry, Angelika.
It's perfectly fine. You're the boss. Thank you very much. I think I started this panel by saying that I really like to look at complex structures, to take them apart and see how they work. And I think what I've learned from this panel is that this system has a lot of moving parts, from what I see. What I've learned from Mr. Buchle is that we have a lot of work to do, and we all have our part in order that all of us can reap the benefits. From Mr. Egenhofer, I learned that it's important to identify, phase out, and substitute. From Mr. Kovacevic, I've learned the importance of non-recourse project finance and the emphasis on urgency, as well as the competences that we have locally to actually do this. And then from Ms. Lazarevic, I've learned the importance to quantify what are the resources, what amount we actually need to invest to make this happen. Now, to close off this panel and sort of give us a more comprehensive lesson learned, I invite my dear colleague, Jovana Bingulac, to give us the lessons learned, after which we will close this panel. Jovana, please.
Thank you. My name is Jovana Bingulac. I'm a senior associate at an international law firm, CMS Rajkovic-Heinz, which operates here in cooperation with Petrikic and Partneri Law Office. I am actually part of the ESG and sustainability team in the office, and also cover banking and finance. So I was very intrigued to be actually welcomed to this discussion and to listen to this discussion. I have, over the past period, we have heard a lot about CBAM, not only from the energy aspect, but also from various other aspects. And I think this is one of the first maybe sustainability topics in which we actually got to understand that this is actually going to affect us, and this is not something that is about to come and we still have time, and that maybe for Serbia this was the first time that it hit us, that, as Dirk had said, it's time for action, and then we cannot wait any longer, and we need to be proactive. So I was not surprised to hear from all of our panelists that this was the case, and that we really had really little time to actually adapt and implement everything that has maybe been in place in other parts of Europe, and that we really need to step up and take action. That being said, CBAM is very important from a global level, as it is pivotal and actually, as my colleague Angelika had said, leveling the playing field between the EU countries and the non-EU countries. And that is something that is really going to economically impact us. With that being said, we really need to view how this impacts Serbia, and this will impact us both from the EU accession aspect, but also from the environmental aspect, the health and safety aspect of our population, and so forth. The main takeaway I've actually had here is that the first thing we need to do is plan. But we cannot leave it at the planning level. We need to have all the stakeholders actually take action and have specific tools which they need to implement, as often such scenarios are left at the planning level. So the CBAM has mostly been viewed as a policy which is burdensome upon our market, and which will actually entail for them to have additional costs and administrations. But this is not something that it should be viewed as. It should be actually viewed as an opportunity to have our industry transformed, to transform our industry and to make it a leader in the region, and to have in order to have a more sustainable future. With that being said, and as we've actually had a lot of time taken away with really good questions and answers from our panelists, I would just like to conclude that maybe the main takeaway here would be that it is true that we're in the phase of transformation, but we should not actually view this transformation as a negative. We should leave it on a positive level, and we should actually take these transformation challenges and make them into opportunities, and all the obstacles and hurdles which we come about, we should actually use as stepping stones to overcome it, as the main vision is that more sustainable future which we have in the end. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And with that, I would like to close this first panel of the conference.
I also would like to thank you to all panelists, to our moderator, to our lessons learned lady, and please, there is a coffee outside. We need to come back at least 12:30, please, to start and continue with our next session.
Recording.
Poštovani dame i gospodo, ja vas pozivam, vidim da ima još napolju malo ljudi, da počnemo našu sesiju. Profesor Hefron nas čeka da nam se obrati i da nam ispriča jako važnu i zanimljivu temu oko pravedne tranzicije. Dear ladies and gentlemen, we are starting our second session of the conference. This is very, very also important part of the conference, which is amazingly linked with the previous and linked with the reforms in energy sector. I'm inviting our moderator, our member, Milica Pešterić. She's a lawyer she's attorney of the law in Bojović Drašković law firm. Please, Milica, the floor is yours. I don't want to waste time. Please.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Brana. I'll moderate this panel, at which we have Professor Rafael Heffron, professor of the Université de Pau et de Pays de la Dor. Pardon my French, literally pardon. And then we have also speakers, Ms. Rosetta Karova, senior energy lawyer at Energy Community Secretariat. Also, Mr. Thomas Šumskas, a legal manager, so to hear some perspective from the company legal perspective from ENSO, and Mrs. Mira Todorovic-Simeonides, partner at Rocus Athens. So as Brana says, Professor Heffron is waiting for us, so I will pass the floor to him. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just share my screen. So are you able to see the screen?
Yes, we can see the screen, yeah.
So maybe there's an echo coming back to me. Hopefully that can be fixed. But thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. And it's good to see, let's say, some old colleagues. I was doing my master's at the same time at the University of Cambridge as Milica, the chair of the session. So just a small bit about myself. I'm currently a professor in energy justice and social contract at the more simply at the University of Pau in France, where we have a team of around 20 researchers working on issues of the energy justice and the just transition. And just also to say that I'm a just transition expert with the European Commission and also serve on a task force on the just transition with the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. So I'm going to speak to you today about the just transition and what, why, and how of the just transition, and also relate maybe to a few issues that people have been speaking on already. So when we think of a just energy transition, I want to highlight maybe briefly why this has become of interest. And let's say this really has become of interest initially back in the year 2015. And we see this becoming an issue because all countries had to set their energy and climate targets for 2030. And that was set out, 195 countries agreed to the Paris COP21 agreement. And we can see, let's say here, key issues for lawyers if we think, let's say, why has the legal community become very interested in this issue? And let's say it was in 2017 that governments began to take note of the just transition as an issue. And let's say really for lawyers, we can think of the year 2019 because that's when the first time when finance was advanced towards a just transition. And let's say COP28 is ongoing, and we see just transition being a central issue at COP28 currently. So why is it becoming a key issue is we're looking at a rise in data around issues around the just transition. And that provides, let's say, us as lawyers, a lot of evidence for thinking about that. And that comes from the international IPCC reports. Crucially, let's say from a practicing perspective, it comes from insurance data, economic data, socioeconomic data, and health and environmental data. So we as lawyers have to manage the rise in all that data. And that leads me into my second point when we're thinking of the just transition and energy project development. And what we as, let's say, a legal community, we have to determine what are known as the 3 R's of project development. So we're thinking about risk, reward, and responsibility. And we're thinking, how do we manage risk? Who's going to share that risk around the project development? Who's going to share the reward? We know that many, let's say, energy companies would believe that they take on the majority of the risk, therefore they should have the majority of the reward. And who shares, let's say, the responsibility in the environmental impact? And let's say, how do we balance that between local communities, governments, and the companies themselves? And this is a crucial issue that we need to resolve. Usually you need to resolve it before you can gain that project finance. And if we don't manage to resolve this relationship between risk, reward, and responsibility, that can be why a project does not happen, or why a project may happen. And let's say, just to give you maybe a quick example, one of the reasons carbon capture storage projects have not really happened is because they have not resolved this relationship between risk, reward, and responsibility. And when we think of this issue of risk and reward and responsibility, we can see some governments taking action. And we like to think about it in terms of one of the ways you resolve this risk, reward, and responsibility issue is through issues around justice. And what we can see here is, in terms of issues around justice, we see what are these issues. We can see that there are principles of justice applied, and these are known as distributive, procedural, restorative, recognition, and cosmopolitan. And what we can see are that these principles are being utilized in countries already. They are being introduced in the United States, a developed country, but also in developing countries in Colombia and South Africa. And I just want to give an example. Here we can see in the US in 2022, last year, they were introduced. And the idea here is that if you want to avail of different subsidies, up to 62 billion in the US, what they have said is you need to show how you're going to incorporate these justice principles into your project design. And the idea here is you need to show how you introduce these into your energy project design, and therefore the more you do it, you should be able to get funding for your project. You should be able to avail of the subsidies for your project. So we can see that specifically in terms of procedural, distributive, recognition, and restorative. And if we look in more detail, we can see that they actually specifically refer to different definitions. So if you're struggling for a definition of what these types of justice mean, it comes directly from some research. But if we want to explore very briefly what these mean, distributive is around the finance, procedural is around the legal system itself, restorative is around ensuring that there are less environmental impacts from these energy activities, and that if there are damage to the environment, that there is a plan in place to correct that damage. And recognition and cosmopolitan, they are around ensuring that each stakeholder is accounted for the energy project. And we see here, you know, a quick overview. United States, Colombia, and South Africa, the different principles they ensure that are applied in their just energy transition. And we can see how then this relates to the different, let's say, risks. And I note that a few people talked about some risks in the energy sector. Well, here we are trying to manage these risks and ensure that they are managed across the planning phase, the construction phase, the operation phase, and the decommissioning phase. And the idea here is the greater that you manage these different risks through these justice principles, the easier it will be to obtain project finance and manage those risks across the sector. And when we look, let's say, more specifically at these risks, we're thinking of those risk issues around environmental impacts, insurance, project finance, taxation, disclosure, aligning with the 2030 UN Sustainable Development Goals, issues around climate change action, economics, bankruptcy issues, rules of foreign investment. So all these different risks, we're trying to manage these at the same time. And crucially, as you can see, in that planning phase, in that construction, in that operation, and through to that decommissioning phase. So you have to have a decommissioning phase at the outset of your energy project. And that, let's say, brings me through to my some final thoughts or reflections. And we can see that, let's say, when we're thinking of the idea of a just transition, the way a lawyer or the way an energy company or the way, let's say, a government department should be thinking about this is part of a scenario and strategic planning exercise where you're thinking about the future. You want to show how you are managing risk. You want to show how you may be resilient in light of maybe an economic crisis, or let's say a health crisis like COVID-19, or in the context of climate change. And one of the documents where we can see this further highlighted, or that is very important today, is this document from the United Nations, where we're thinking about future-proofing decision-making. And the idea of future-proofing is we're going back to that issue of reward, those three R's: reward, risk, and responsibility. And that idea of responsibility is changing, that when we make an energy decision, we are not looking maybe for 100% perfection, but what we are looking for is that the energy decision, we can say that when we made that decision, we use the best practice at that particular time, we use the best available scientific data, the best risk management strategy, we utilized the best environmental impact data, and we considered some alternatives. And all of that came together to inform our decision making. And we can see here what we are thinking about is connecting those three R's: risk, responsibility, and reward with those justice principles. And we are ensuring that these are best represented in a, let's say, energy justice report. And the idea here is we're linking the idea of having all this in place so that we can show how we are going to reduce risk, Therefore, we can increase investor confidence, and therefore we can lower the costs of project finance, and we can show in terms of a just transition how we are going to increase jobs. And if you would like to read more around these issues, you can see more in, we have produced an article in one of the key practitioner and academic journals from the International Bar Association, talking about how we can improve energy justice and ensure greater energy market reform, ensure that justice is allocated throughout different institutions involved in, let's say, developing energy infrastructure, ensuring that finance is allocated to the clean energy transition, dealing with risk management, and clarifying the role of the energy consumer. And you can also see that in our book that was actually just published this week. And to show you why this is a key issue, we already see you can download this book for free, and it's nearly been downloaded over 10,000 times in 4 days. And I would like to highlight, let's say, finally, we do plan to work with Branislava on a joint event, maybe to get into some of these details on the just transition, how we can utilize these justice principles to develop, let's say, this clean energy transition and ensure that we can develop energy projects in a more just way. So I'll finish there and be happy to answer any questions. If you want to get in touch, there's my email addresses. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Raphael, for this lovely presentation. Before we move on to other speakers, I would like just to say, as we speak now, there is a COP28 going on in United Arab Emirates. So in that regard, I would like to ask you, how do you see justice issues emerging after this event, after the climate change conference, as I said, currently going on in Emirates? Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that's a very important question, because I think if you look at what's happening over at COP28, you will see two very big announcements. The first is from the finance industry, and you will see that the leading development banks, including the European Investment Bank, including the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, they have all come together and said how they are going to have, let's say, a new mechanism in place for financing this just transition to a low carbon economy, and that a lot of new finance will have to abide by a set of, let's say, justice principles that they have in mind. A second announcement is that there is a new just transition pathway program, and all governments are going to produce some plans about what they're going to do for this just transition pathway program. So for me, as a legal community, we have to be following these two significant developments, because they are going to show how the energy sector can be financed, let's say, until 2030, but actually also until 2050. So I think we as a community, energy law community, we really need to be looking out for those two developments and how our governments respond and how our banks respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation and additional responses. Now I would like to move forward with Ms. Rosetta Karova, as I said, Senior Energy Lawyer at the Energy Community Secretariat, to hear a bit on the EU energy to electricity market and to discuss later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the warm welcome and the introduction. It's my pleasure to be here again with you. And after this presentation now on the just transition, I would move a bit to the details of the legal framework. I have been asked to contribute today to what is the legal framework governing the electricity market integration of the contracting parties and the EU member states. And I think this fits very well because today's conference is focusing on the reforms and on the reforms of the electricity markets. In the first session today, we discussed the CBAM, the impact of the adoption of the carbon border adjustment mechanism in the European Union, and what would that mean for the contracting parties. And as we heard, there is even one clause there that basically allows for exemption from the application of this mechanism towards the contracting parties, provided that they have coupled their markets with the European Union electricity markets. But I would say that is only one maybe initiative and only one of the triggers or the drivers for market coupling. But that is not the only one, and certainly for maybe even for Serbia, as we heard this morning, but also for some of the others, it's not the most important driver. Of course, that sets the time limit shorter. So as we know, we have to couple the markets before the end of 2025 in order to get the exemption. But I would say this has been the objective of the energy community from its establishment. I mean, since 2006, when the Energy Community Treaty entered into force, the main objective was not only liberalizing the national electricity markets. That is only a precondition. It has not been the idea to create a regional market in the Western Balkans, certainly, because that is one of the ways, and that is how the European Union has established the single market, by liberalizing national electricity markets, by regionalizing them, by establishing broader, let's say, electricity markets at regional level, with the objective to get a single European market, the single market to be extended also to the energy sectors. And this is what the energy community has been standing for since its establishment. So to set up the reasons, the preconditions at national level, then through regional solution to integrate the contracting parties electricity markets with the EU member states. And again, okay, why not? It was tested and it, okay, now it works. And why we are why we are speaking about that today is because through the years we have heard that there are, even though we had the Energy Community Treaty, which, as you know, it has different titles in it, titles according to which decisions can be taken to bind only the contracting parties so basically the Western Balkans and Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia. And this is the export of the rules. This is what has been mainly used, and this is what we have been relying on for the last 10 years, almost 20 years. Then there is Title 3, and this is, let's say, the first time that we have used this title, and this one binds not only the contracting parties, but also the neighboring EU member states. And then there is Title 4, which stands for the real integration and measures that bind not only the contracting parties, but also the full European Union. And now, finally, after spending several years on discussing, and you may remember, many of you in this room, I know very well, we have been discussing how we can import the CACM, so the CACM regulation, the one about coupling of electricity markets in the energy. How can we ensure this so-called reciprocity? How can we ensure that the EU member states treat our contracting parties in the same way as they treat each other? And we have almost time. I mean, the discussion started in 2015-16, and I have so many versions of the CACM adapted for the energy commuter that I think it... But now, finally, in 2022, there has been a decision of the Ministerial Council, and we have dared to use one of the other titles, not Title 2 only exporting rules, but basically binding also the neighboring EU member states. And with that, not that problems anymore, not that everything has been resolved, and not that we don't have open legal questions. Now at the point when we can say now maybe the main legislative barriers have been removed, and now we can finally do what we have been here for since 2006. We can start to integrate the markets, and let's see what is needed for that. But it's not only one decision. So this started in 2021 when the Clean Energy Package Directive, so the new electricity regulation and the risk preparedness, the electricity directive and the risk preparedness regulation have been integrated in the energy community. And at that time, this was done on the basis of Title II. But then in 2022, we have revised also these two legal acts under Title III. And together with them, there has been an important integration of the ACER regulation into the energy community, the electricity regulation, but also other network codes. And these are the market network codes, the system operation and energy restoration network codes. So basically, I will focus on the market ones for today because we are talking about market integration. But as you can see, the electricity acquis has enlarged a lot in the energy community. By last year, our legal framework was around 100 pages. I think now we had to divide it in 5-6 different volumes because it weighs more than 2,600 pages of acquis. Here I have provided also the links, and I guess you will get the presentations where you can see how we grouped, and all these adapted versions applicable to the energy community are there. So why is this so important? I mean, now we say that there is this finally reciprocity being ensured, but of course, as I also said, this my opinion that we had to use this Title III, Title IV through the years because we have them in the treaty, and to ensure this reciprocity, so to allow that our contracting parties and their energy stakeholders are treated in the same way as the EU member states ones. But also there has been some important changes that decisions on cross-border issues, or regional ones, now are to be taken not only by the energy community institutions, so the Energy Community Regulatory Board, but also by ACER. So we are now allowing ACER to take decisions for cross-border issues whenever a contracting party and a member state is affected. So whenever a member state is part of this, is most of the regions, as you can see in the adapted legislation. There are very few where ECRB will actually be taking decision. This will be then ACER. And then these decisions and this package is binding not only on the contracting parties, but also on the neighboring EU member states. And now you may say, okay, but we are talking about integration into the EU pan-European electricity market. So why we actually are binding only the neighbors? I will not enter into the discussion on why this decision has been chosen, but let's say that a Title III decisions are taken with a positive vote of the European Union. So what we are also considering is that once the European Union and not the Commission has voted, it represents the positive view of the need for integration of the contracting parties within the pan-European electricity markets based on a support and agreement of all the EU member states. So even though legally they are not bound, but this will be now tested with certain decisions to be taken at the European level, that basically we consider that the pan-European is possible. The deadline is very short, and today I don't want to be the anti-speaker saying we don't have time, but really, I mean, it was only 1 year for transposition of all this legislation, and this expires at the end of this month. However, the implementation is going on in parallel, and this I see because certain deadlines have been put to expire before. So what are we talking about? What markets are to be integrated here? The FCI guidelines, so the forward capacity allocation, is also part of the package, but we are talking about market coupling of the short-term markets, and I will not go into details, you know it very well. These are the day-ahead and the intraday markets. And then also another difficult nut to crack, let's say, to implement is the EBGL, so the electricity balancing guideline. And this is also the one that has to be transposed and implemented by the end of this month. And when I discussed with Branislava, like what would be of most interest, she said the most difficult thing for us to understand is what are these terms, conditions, and methodologies, and what does it mean that Acer is going to take decisions. And in order to help the contracting parties, we have drafted certain what we call template clauses, model clauses, that we have shared with the countries and said, look, I mean, this is the minimum that you should have in the legislation in order for this to work, but you are free to adapt it and to put it in the legislative framework as if it's for your country. There are types of terms, conditions, and methodologies, the pan-European ones, the regional ones, and the national. Are easy. I mean, this is what you had so far. They are developed at national level, proposal of the national TSOs, and the national regulatory authority, so the agency in Serbia will decide. The regional ones are becoming already more complicated because they have to be proposed by participants of the regions, and the regions, there are different regions within the different acts defined. Some of them involved, as I said, EU member states and contracting parties. Others are only contracting parties. They all have to agree to make a proposal, but don't worry. Provisions there saying what if they don't submit anything. So the ECRB and Acer have also responsibility to act, even in cases when there is no proposal. I fear to say that in our regions and in the energy community, maybe this is something that is not usually happening in the EU, but I fear that this might be an occasion for Acer and ECRB to act quite a lot, because several deadlines have already expired and no regional TCM has been proposed. But what is the most interesting one is, what does it mean a pan-European TCM? These are the ones that are developed without us. I mean, without us, without the participation of the contracting parties, TSOs and NEMOs. These are the ones that have already been adopted in the European Union, that are subject to amendments, that will be adopted in the future, which we will not participate, but we are obliged to take them on board. So there is no take it or leave it, it's take it or take it again and apply it. And this is, I understand, the most difficult one, how to put it in legislation. I mean, here most of us are lawyers, and then we want to know how this should read in our legislation. And these are the ones that we have also listed in our template clauses by saying that you should put an obligation on the TSOs or the NEMOs, depending on the TCM itself. It applies. So there will be probably a minimum of an obligation to publish it, because you cannot change it, you cannot propose amendments to it. And this should be not only valid for the TCMs that are now adopted and exist, but also for their amendments. And here I have put one slide with few examples. I mean, there is also with the TCMs adopted by Acer. And as you can see, they're being changed quite often, some of them, by proposals of EU TSOs and EU NEMOs. And there are a lot of documents that are, it's not only one short methodology, but there are like a lot of annexes coming with it. And this is something that we'll have to apply also in the bidding zones of the energy community if we want to be part of that integrated electricity market. And I think this is fair. I mean, this is not to be seen as a burden, but simply if we want to be part of that market and they have already developed something that applies to all of them, I think it's simply fair that they require, and their TSOs and NEMOs require us to be bound by the same legislation that has been taken place. And so this is something that we would like, and not we would like to see, but this is something that also the EU partners are requiring for the market coupling to be part of the legislation. Very briefly on this, I will not dwell a lot, because we have really seen this, and I think the reasons why we want to do the market coupling is very clear. And now there, if I could put, if there was space to put another picture here, it would have been about the single intraday market coupling, and it would have looked similar, because now also the single intraday market coupling has been completed in the with the joining of the last bidding zones. But what is then the status with the contracting parties? And this is a map that we are updating. We are keeping a list of the progress of the contracting parties, of where they stand, not so much with the transposition, but let's say with establishing markets. Because if you remember, one of the slides was on what we are coupling, and we are coupling markets, and they have to be established first. So national preconditions have to be there. And Serbia has done well in this regard. So it has both day-ahead and intraday market that are functioning and live. And some of the other contracting parties, most of them have established the day-ahead only. And they have designated NIMOs at national level. But as you can see here, that's simply not enough. So transposition of the full legislation and all those lists is what is needed in order for us to claim to be able to play part and to take part of the single European day-ahead market. And with this, I would like to stop here, but I'm open for questions because I think I put too much on the table.
Okay. Thank you, Rosetta. In that regard, yeah, no, I think that you actually answered the question I wanted to ask, but just as a comment, we usually hear very positive and optimistic feedback from our SEPECs in terms of development. They introduced intraday market recently and so forth. So they talk a lot about coupling, market coupling, and one would have the impression that it's one step away from realization of so. You did give a brief comment on that, but if you would like to say more, and I think it's important that we highlight that issue, how far SEPECs or we are from a real market coupling in terms of a regulatory framework. Thank you.
Indeed, this is something that was also not very clear to us. I mean, when I say us, I think also the energy community, because up to last year and already before, as I said, I mean, the CACM has been adopted since 2015. So we have also the ECRB, the energy community institutions have tried to assist the contracting parties to say, please do it as soon as possible, because, you know, without this, there is no market coupling. And once we remove these legal and regulatory barriers, then you will actually be able to couple. So this is what Serbia did, and it did well. I mean, this is what also Macedonia did. And they have transposed parts of the CACM in national legislation. Serbia went even in more details, but at least the procedure for NIMO designation, the TSO and NIMO's tasks were there. So then also on the list we have put, there is a NIMO designated in Serbia. But now when the real discussion started on developing MCO integration plan, and this is something that will be submitted next week, hopefully, now we come to a discussion with the European partners and the European NIMOs and Acer and the European Commission, and they say, no, you don't have any NIMOs in the contracting parties. And this is a blunt truth. And this is something that we also were trying to argue and to say, look, but they did transpose parts of the CACM. They did designate a NIMO following all the criteria. Why this is not sufficient? And the answer is because our NIMOs and our TSOs are bound by all this legislation that they listed there. So they have all the tasks and obligations. And if you want to be called NIMO like them, you simply have to do the same. So basically, and I think this is very important, I mean, for us also as lawyers, but also for the institutions, that we are not considered to have a NIMO correctly designated that can actually participate to the market coupling before all the, and this is not SEPEC's job anymore. I mean, this is, they did what they can, and I think Milos is right to say we did great, but this is now up to the institutions to do fast with the transposition. And Serbia, I have seen the draft legislation. We had comments from the Secretariat, but I think it's on the good way. And if it speeds up with the adoption, I think we can still catch the train.
Thank you. Hopefully that's going to happen soon. Now I pass the floor to Mr. Tomas Šumskas to a bit more on cybersecurity network codes. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah. Oh. So my name is Tomas Šumskas. I've been working in the energy sector, but I cannot call myself energy lawyer because my work mostly focuses on IT and data related matters, which supports energy sector. So, and for the last few years, I have been a member of cybersecurity network code development team. So I will try to present the energy transition and how does it look like from the viewpoint of this code. So first of all, a general background, what are the network codes? So in general, it is a secondary legislation of the EU, which is adopted by the Commission. It is legally binding in all EU member states and of course in all countries which transpose this law into the national law. This is not a new thing. It was introduced, network codes were introduced by the third energy package. And so far, we already have, let's say, from that package stemming 3 categories of codes. So we have connection codes, we have market codes, we have system operation codes. All of them are strongly related with energy and the connection to the grid, to the market, energy market. And so what happens with a new clean energy package? With a new package, as we already saw from the presentation of Professor Rafael Heffron, we will need more and more data for it. We will need more exchanges among industry members of this data. And of course, we'll need to develop dedicated and more IT systems to secure these exchanges, to process this data. And that also means that energy sector will become and is already becoming more and more dependable on IT systems. And it also means that it is becoming more vulnerable to various cyber attacks. And this is why the clean energy packers foresee a new category of a network code, a cybersecurity network code, which would deal with these risks and possible cyber threats. So the code itself, it aims at various points, starting from the assessment of cyber risks at various levels, starting from the company level to the national level, regional level, and then entire European level. It provides how the mitigation plans should be adopted, drafted, and what security measures should be implemented. Also, how cybersecurity incidents. So I will not go into details, technical details. I will more focus on legal aspects of this code. So, as I mentioned, cybersecurity network code is a network code, but it is the first code developed in accordance with a package. And this package provides quite different procedure of this code. So, which stem from third energy package were drafted, for example, by ENTSO-E, and later were adopted by the Commission. According to the clean energy package, all the codes now have to be drafted by ENTSO-E or EUDSO entity or in cooperation by both associations. And this is the first code which was drafted by EUDSO entity. So EUDSO entity is association of distribution system operators, and that means that the new clean energy package, it strengthens the role of a distribution systems, and they become more and more important in the energy sector. So, and of course, it adds additional complexity because it's one thing to draft a code by for TSOs when we had at the time more than 40 TSOs, but we have thousands of DSOs, and to ensure fluent cooperation, it's more and more difficult. The first challenge, I think, when it comes to the code is that all previous codes were drafted in 12 months. Now we have a requirement, at least for this code, to draft it in only 6 months, which is another point is a very diverse range of bodies and undertaking which are involved in development of the code. In the past, we had the bodies and entities from energy sector, but now we also have bodies and entities from the IT, from digital sector, which I will show in the next slide. The same is with the governance. So all these bodies will be involved in the governance. So all TCMs, all methodologies will need to be adopted, not only by the TSOs or some other parties, but also with the incorporation of very wide community of other members from both industries, from energy and digital. And of course, it's a very big challenge because we need to align the code not only with the existing, we need to align the code also with digital regulations, and especially considering that some of them, very important of them, are still in the drafting phase. So yeah, and here is just a graph to demonstrate what entities are and will be involved, are involved in the development and will be involved in the implementation of the code. So as you can see, we have in blue energy members. Some of them are new, for example, EU DSO entity, we have regional cooperation centers, but in orange, we also saw a whole range of entities from digital sector. So we have, for example, ENISA, which is a regulatory authority for digital sector. We have NIS competent authorities, CC, NCAs, T-certs, and etc. The code itself will apply. I mean, these entities will be involved and have functions according to the code, but the requirements, cybersecurity requirements, will also apply to much wider scope of entities. So it's not the energy sector, it will be IT providers, for example, and other entities involved in the whole chain of production of various equipment for TSOs. Here's the network code will first apply in the EU. It is a EU regulation, but as most of our codes, it has extraterritorial approach. So, of course, at a certain point, I assume it will be implemented by energy community members because it's part of energy acquis. But before that, we also have this approach of civil agreements, where we conclude agreements with relevant TSOs to transpose the requirements of a code, at least at TSO level. And we have a novelty which we didn't have in the previous codes, which comes from, again, digital sector, and in particular from general data protection regulation. So meaning that the code will apply not only for members established in EU, but also for all entities who will provide services in European Union, even though we are not established in EU. Yeah. And yeah, so here's just a timeline to demonstrate where we are. So currently, it's still, the code is in a drafting phase, but it's expected to be adopted very soon in the Q1 2024 by the Commission, and will become binding in the EU. Yeah, last for quite a long time. It could take even 8 years until it is finally implemented. But yeah, the requirements will apply gradually during this term. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Okay, we are all witnessing how cyber and IT regulation is a part of all the processes, including the energy regulation, but can you tell us a bit more on your expectation on further development of cybersecurity and IT regulation in future? Thank you.
Yeah, so indeed, the network code is not the only one in this field. We have upcoming way more regulations. So one of which I mentioned is NIS, so which focuses on, it is already adopted, which focuses on the protection of critical infrastructure. But we have other regulations upcoming too. So for example, Cyber Resilience Act and very famous now, for example, Artificial Intelligence Act, which also will apply to energy sector. There are specific regulations, specific indications that energy sector IT systems will be considered to be in the scope of this IE Act. And even if now, let's say, artificial intelligence maybe is not yet very used in energy sector, but it's just a matter of time when it will be. And we already hear that there are some already testing IT systems to be used for system operations, for example.
Thank you. Now we will hear our last speaker for this panel, Mrs. Mira Todorovic-Simeonides. Please, thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Mira Todorovic. I'm an energy lawyer, Greek qualified, for more than 20 years. I'm the head of the energy team of Rokas Law Office based in Athens, which has law offices, including in Belgrade. I have been dealing with the energy sector and supporting developers and clients for more than 20 years, cross-border Greece predominantly, but also cross-border. I have also worked with the regulators on legal acts when necessary. Okay, today how it goes? Providing access to the grid, regulatory options and priorities. I understand this is one of very important and new subject in Serbia, and my intention was to, if possible, to move forward, to give a little bit broader, maybe, insight on the issue. So the question of the representation is there a priority from the regulatory perspective for connection to the grid among RES technologies and or depending on the RES plan developers, particularly in case of limited grid capacities? Basically, if there is competition among RES developers, and what are the rules for such, and if there are rules. So we'll start from the directives, mostly renewable directives. First, the task is to achieve now with the amended renewable directive 42.5% of consumption in European Union by renewables. There are many factors, issues, mechanisms that are dealing with this, like market planning, design, state aid, encouraging certain renewables, some increasing of capacity and planning of capacity of the grid, of course, and speeding up of the licensing procedures, among which we have also access to the grid. Now we are going to focus only on the access to the grid. All other issues are way too complex to be discussed now. Let's start from the beginning. Initially, European directives, RES directives, considered that it is compulsory to give priority or guaranteed access to renewables in order to increase the capacities of renewables in the system. It lasted for some time, so there was an option, either priority access or guaranteed access for all renewables. There was not much discretion at the time. Of course, the most developed were wind and solar, and they still are. After that, with the fourth energy package, we have slowly abolishing of these privileges for the renewables, which is pretty much understandable. From one side, there are not much new production plants at all, so we have mostly renewables. Plus, there are some other measures, structures, issues to be resolved through electricity market legislation and organization. But the question is whether there are rules that will apply to all the member states, how to deal with competition among renewables. And the answer is no. Each country will choose its own mix. It will have its own development plan for renewables, for addressing climate. Going to be some general rules and promotions on the level of the European Union. So it also is stated that the member states may set a ranking between different types of renewables and high efficiency cogeneration. Well, now we can add storage to that story completely. Now let's see what is promoted on the European level. Wind and solar, for sure, and they are going to carry the most of the, to continue carrying the most of the development in the renewable sector, but they are not completely relied on, as we know, because in each case we have biomass, biofuel, and other which are controllable input renewable sources. Old one, hydropower, we cannot ever forget about it. And then we have innovative technologies. According to the new one amended 2023 amendments of the third renewable directive, member states shall set an indicative target of 5% of newly installed RES technologies by 2030. There are going to be a lot newly installed capacities by that year. So 5% is not little, it's a lot. Now, what is recommended, what is interesting maybe for you, it's something which is called the regulatory sandbox. What does it mean? It means that in most of the countries, according to one of the studies, there should be amendments of the regulation which would enable that there are going to be some kind of pilot projects which will enable putting in and promoting innovative technologies that have to be checked in practice. There may be some different and difficult legal issues from the competition law point of view and from the energy point of view, because there are going to be derogations of a lot of rules in order to promote this kind of project and to check them in practice. What else is promoted? Some developers, consumers, and energy communities. They're highly promoted on the European level. Sometimes even to, let's see, member states shall ensure the active consumers have the right to agreed connection within a reasonable time. Then we have that for some small one, energy communities and consumers, plus energy communities can be energy consumers very often. In some cases, there could be simple notification procedure for them. Certain areas, this is new. Renewables acceleration areas are introduced by the amendments of the RES Directive 2023, which means the member states will designate certain areas for which they think that probably from mostly from the environmental point of view, that they are safer for development of the renewables. And for these areas, they are going to be much faster, the procedure, for the whole licensing procedure, plus the connection to the grid. Offshore, There is a strategy for offshore development and targets. For instance, renewables acceleration area, the directive predicts that the duration of licensing procedure should not exceed 12 months. When you compare with the duration of procedures at this time in many countries, it is often 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. So this is a very, very big goal, let's say. Similarly, for offshore, that at this time you need 7 years, they want to cut it to 2 years plus 6 months if necessary. Further, storage. We don't have to speak a lot about storage because this is something that is very much promoted as a flexibility measure, as measure for balancing of renewables and so on. There is a now in March 2023, the Commission issued recommendation about energy storage, interesting, in which it describes what measures should be undertaken in order for promoting of storage. Now we can roughly divide that in 3 categories. It is behind the meter storage, which is probably the most promoted at this moment. It goes together with the RES production unit, in front of the meter, and standalone batteries of storage system, which is a separate. Electromobility, I don't have to say too much about this. The targets are very big. What is intended, how much to be developed in the next 5 or 10 years, and where to put chargers, and everything will be connected to the grid. Renewables power purchase agreements. Long-term power purchase agreements between the producer, direct agreements on sale of electricity between a producer. In this case, now we speak only about the renewable producer and consumers, very often intensive energy industry, which consumes 25% in union of all the energy. Now, what does new directive say? That member states should remove 5 barriers. Okay, promote such agreements. Then it criticized that they limited only a small number of member states and for large undertakings. Also mentioned that there is a Commission recommendation 22 on guidance on development of renewables PPAs. So for the moment, I have finished in various technologies or types of producers that should and would be connected to the grid. Maybe I have missed some, but this is enough for the moment, I think. Now, what do we have? We have the grid operator. Apart from maintaining reliability and safety of the grid operator, whether or distribution, it should establish and publish objective, transparent, proportionate, efficient procedures. It should speed up the administrative procedures. If, apart from this, what I have mentioned for certain areas and offshore, it is predicted that procedures should be limited to 2 years with some extension of up to 1 year. In comparison with the current procedure, this is very okay. They can use operational tools. They can use operational limitations. So we have seen that this is on the member states to decide through their plan, through their rules for connection to the grid, and what they will promote. Largely technical issue, what and how can be connected, but it is not only. Okay, now I cannot answer the questions. I can raise questions, and I will give you now an example of Greece, how it was regulated 2 years ago. First, the rules for transmission and for distribution system are not the same. Transmission system priorities were divided into groups. Each group has maximum capacity, which I didn't want to burden here with many details, just to have a little bit of some general picture about that. So if some category is filled with capacity, it goes to our category where it can suit by technology or whatever. So we have the first category, acceleration areas, certain areas, and strategic investment. Second category, very high, renewables PPAs. Third category, energy communities. Fourth category, RES with internal storage. And then the rest of it and some parallel categories. Distribution system has its own, with offshore and so on. After 1.5 years of the application of this, when 1 year, actually, basically the first category has finished, applications from the first category have been finished and processed and grid terms provided and so on, there has been some adjustment. First, more promoting of PPAs through the increase of capacity, doubling, huge capacity, 2,000 megawatts for RES PPAs. Speeding up of connection of storage plants. Now we had only behind the meter storage plant in the fourth category. We have now all storage in the fourth category and some other measures. At this moment, and I'm slowly finishing my presentation, there have been announced new amendments to these measures, at this moment still only discussed. And this is where maybe we come to some points close to some of the issues discussed in Serbia. One big issue is standalone batteries that are going to be giving pretty much priority. It's not clearly sure in what way, in a regulatory way. And then for photovoltaic, already far in the procedure that have connection terms already, they will probably be put into position to choose to have a reduced input into a grid, not the capacity, but the limitation of the input up to 50% at certain hours, or they will be obliged to add internal storage, behind the meter storage, to their production unit, which of course changes their plan, financing, technology, and many other things. Open issues are industrial PPAs priorities. So amendments that are going, and this one, it's not like like we have seen so far that how regulation is moving. The rules for connection are changing. Maybe not dramatically. Here we don't have. We have a little bit of adjustments, but they do affect, and this regulator and grid operator must have in mind, and they usually do, how they're affecting the project, because we have the long licensing procedure, we have the planned project, we have secured financial, technical, everything, studies, everything, and then we have changes from project planning, changes financing. When you add batteries, it changes a lot the cost of the project and the whole planning of the project. If you have changes of technologies, and you will have in long procedures plus in changing, you have to amend all the issued licenses. All that affects general legal security and predictability and should be taken care of in a very, let's say, cautious way. Thank you. This is what I wanted to tell you.
Thank you, Mira. I would just want to give a brief comment on this, given that we had this recent changes in regulation concerned to connection to the grid. So maybe we would like to hear, so to say, Greek experience, actually the experience of the amendments to the Greek laws in terms of the reaction of investors to the regulatory priority lists and other, because that's what we are expecting here as well. Thank you.
Okay, I have mentioned a little bit now what is interesting is that there are a lot of associations apart from individual project developers or companies that are. Okay, let's start from the beginning. Before any amendment, there is a consultation, either public consultation and consultation with all the relevant stakeholders. But also some role are played by association. There is association of RES producers. There is association of wind RES producers, of solar producers, of suppliers and traders, of energy consumers. So all of them are participating very widely with the government, with the regulator, with the transmission system operator, discussing all pros and cons of any of these change. I believe that it helps for the smooth, because we didn't have, after these amendments so far, we didn't have some legal actions, to the best of my knowledge, of course. So it looks that somehow these changes went smoothly.
Thank you. So before we move to lessons learned and hear our distinguished colleague Milos on this, to hear which takeaways we have from this panel, maybe if the audience have or has some questions, please, now is the moment. Thank you. Yeah, now or never. No, it's not that bad, but if you have something to ask, yeah, now would be the moment.
Easier to write down questions now. Just a second. Yeah. Oh, here it is. We can agree that the application of just transition principles in the macro energy markets is the new vibrant and relevant market behavior. However, is there sufficient and suitable legal, financial, and other relevant instruments that benefit and protect the end consumers, including prosumers, in the same or similar manner as just transition principles are applied in practice to the microenergy market that are used to mitigate risks that come with it? Depending on your answer, how would you, in your humble opinion, approach this touchy balancing act of equitably distributing the same principles in practice? Thank you. And this is a question for the whole panel.
Thank you. Was that the question for Rafael? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if Rafael is here with us to respond to this question, if that was directed to him.
Yes, I'm still here. Well, I think the question is also maybe a reflection for the rest of the panel as well. But let's say for me the short answer in brief, if I understand the question correctly, I think very much the just transition principles and let's say related issues, they all need to be incorporated into any proposed reform, let's say, of the electricity sector. And I think, as you've pointed out, maybe in your question, I think that the adoption of just transition principles are, let's say, a good way to think about managing risk. And that's managing risk with, let's say, the different stakeholders, particularly the consumers, but also with financial institutions. And I think after COP28, we will see an even bigger link between, let's say, the international world of finance, but also the finance around the EU and neighboring countries with the just transition. So you may not see action immediately, but I think over the next 2 to 3 years, there's going to be a big change with these institutions really connecting finance with just transition principles.
Thank you, Rafael. Anyone else would like to ask something? No? No. Okay, then I will pass the floor to Milos to define the takeaways we have from today's panel. Please proceed. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like first to thank to Milica on this wonderful leading of our panel in the afternoon session. Thank you, Milica. Also, thanks to the whole panelists for the contribution to this really interesting and important topic to all of us. We are reforming the energy sector and energy markets, all of us day by day. We are participants, we are creators, we are listeners, we are consumers, we are a lot of things. And we are all trying our best in doing our jobs and in everyday life to let's say, be in the mission of energy transition, whatever it means in a single moment. It is just two words who are, let's say, known by heart by all of us. But the thing is that, yeah, year by year, decade by decade, these principles, let's say, are remain the same. But the way how we are going to contribute and how we are going to finish the energy transition and to find ourselves at the end of this important task are constantly changing because of different things which are happening in the, let's say, world, connected to different kind of things, climate changes, wars, different financial aspects globally, locally, regionally. And this is why what Rafael said to us is really important. Principles of energy justice need to be respected in this way, whatever the ways, and no matter how many hurdles we have on that way, day by day. Okay, we have his new book. I will definitely read it and find more about it, more about the principles, more about the element of energy justice. We heard also about it, how, like, starting from 2017, we started to think about the justice. Now it's incorporated in a lot of, let's say, energy transition elements, including projects, etc. And let's say, we heard about what we have in COP in Dubai, and about the principles we need to follow as a lawyers in the following years, which is also important. And these are the principles we need to observe, and we need to have in front of us whatever we are doing connected to energy transition. Then we heard, we hear Rosetta, a really, really interesting story. What is a new energy market and how the Energy Community Secretariat is dealing with that, and not only Secretariat in European Union first and then a Secretariat. What we need to do in the region and what is important and how ACER will do and how will help the energy transition also in our region by strengthening the market coupling, by strengthening the market, and by actually connecting all of us to be more, let's say, in one community which will secure the energy transition in electricity world, if I may say something like that. Thomas, thank you for wonderful presentation. It's really interesting to hear, like, we're all thinking of cybersecurity somewhere there. It's not in front of us. Well, it will come. We need to prepare. No, it's here. It's here, ladies and gentlemen. We not only need to think about it, we need to incorporate these things in energy sectors. Okay, Serbia region everywhere, and we need to do it quick because artificial intelligence is something which is coming by this, and which will change our observation, our world of energy in total. So we talk about that topics more, also in our association and in other energy panels all around the world. Thank you, Mira. Thank you, Mira. It was a really good, let's say, really good, good structured presentation about where we were with renewables, where we are with renewables. Of course, at the beginning we were like, oh, renewables, we want everybody in agreed. Now we are, let's say, a little bit more precautious. Yesterday, actually, we had a nice a local round table about connection to the grid, and we actually talk about these things more for the aspect of safety, but also from this aspect, as you said, because now we have the new rules, as Milica said, and we also have a debate now, and we'll have the long-lasting debate in the next years, predominantly, I suppose, when we have all the regulatory network concluded and rounded, and we will have the real questions in a practice. Who can be actually connected to the grid and what need to be the conditions? And yes, Mira, you are right. We need to have these conditions strict and strengthened to really know where we are going if we are the investor and we want to connect, and where we need to, which category we are. Like it's a situation in Greece, we don't have that kind of strict categories here, but there are different kind of things. But we need to know as an investor, not just to, my plan is to have something renewable and I want to connect it. No. It's more complex, and that's why we as lawyers are here to make this complexity more simple to our clients. And that's why we need to know about these things and to be familiar with them. At the end, how to connect all those things in one. I will just say, as I started, we are all in energy transition process. First, we need to have principles. We have principles. One of the most important, Rafael, we talk about the just transition and some other principles. Some of them are more changing, some of them are stable. On these stable principles, we need to build, let's say, rules. That rules we need to respect. We need to first make the legislation, need to respect it, need to follow it, monitor it, and after monitoring, if there are some hurdles, think of how to cross, what to change to have the final goal in front of us in a sooner future. I know it will not be easy task. Some of these things and words I'm repeating here, but yeah, I'll repeat them like more years, I know, but I just want as soon as possible the end of this repetition of my words, and to go with some, let's say, after energy transition, some other processes. We may be able to talk about it after the transition. What is after the transition? Maybe it's a question like, which will we could ask ourselves in long years after, but who knows? Let's think about it. Let's first finish what we started all together. Let's try to stay smart, focused, and I think we'll succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Milos, for these useful conclusions. Thank you to the participants, and I will close by this panel. Hopefully that was useful for the conference participants. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, participants, to our 6th conference. Thank you, our panelists, our moderator, how you moderate this panel. Thank you, Milos, for amazing good lessons learned, as always. Also, thank you for first session panelists. And what we can say now, after these 2 sessions, there will be a lot of work for all of us. Not only we need to work together, technical professions, with economists. Many challenges are in front of us, and that means we have to cooperate and continue this work to find a solution. Thank you, and outside is coming a cocktail and a short lunch, and please, networking parties coming. Okay, thank you. See you next year.
Thank you.